Hey everyone, welcome back. If you're new here, I'm glad you found this little corner of the internet. Tonight I've got some Am I the Bad Person stories that are perfect for winding down after a long day. These are the kinds of tales that pull you in with messy family drama, awkward friendships, and those tricky moments where you can't quite tell who's in the wrong. Some of them are frustrating, some are thought-provoking, but overall, they make for a calm stream of voices and situations that you can just drift along with. Whether you're curled up under a blanket or already lying in bed, or maybe even listening to this on a work break, I hope this keeps you company as you start to relax. And before we start, comment below what time you're watching this video, and be sure to subscribe to hear more stories just like these every evening. And if you want, feel free to leave a like on the video. It helps me more than you know. Anyway, take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let's wander through these stories together. Who knows? Maybe by the end, you'll be asleep before you even reach the last one. Our first story comes from someone dealing with a really tough family situation that involves years of history and a lot of pain. Am I the bad person for refusing to help my wife's father after everything he did? I'm 34 and my wife Sarah is 31. We've been married for 6 years and together for 9. Her father, who I'll call Frank, has been a constant source of tension in our relationship from day one. When Sarah was growing up, Frank was what you might generously call a difficult parent. He had serious anger management issues and would fly into rages over the smallest things. Sarah has told me stories about him screaming at her for hours over spilled milk or a bad grade, calling her worthless and stupid. He once threw a plate at the wall inches from her head during a family dinner when she was 12. Frank also had a drinking problem that he refused to acknowledge. Sarah's mum left when Sarah was 16 because she couldn't handle his behaviour anymore. Sarah had to finish high school basically raising herself while dealing with Frank's unpredictable moods and constant criticism. Throughout our entire relationship, Frank has been hostile toward me. He's made it clear that he thinks I'm not good enough for Sarah and has questioned every decision we've made as a couple. When we bought our house, he said we were being financially irresponsible. When Sarah got promoted at work, he said she was probably sleeping with her boss. He's never once congratulated us on any milestone or achievement. At our wedding, Frank got drunk and made a toast where he basically said he hoped our marriage would last longer than most, which everyone took as him predicting we'd get divorced. He's consistently refused to participate in family events and makes Sarah feel guilty every time she chooses to spend time with my family instead of him. The situation came to a head 3 months ago when Frank was diagnosed with liver disease. The doctors said it's directly related to his decades of heavy drinking and that he needs surgery and extensive treatment. Frank called Sarah crying, which was completely out of character for him, begging her to help him through this. Sarah immediately wanted to drop everything to support him. She started talking about taking time off work to drive him to appointments, helping with his medical bills, and potentially having him stay with us during recovery. She said that despite everything he'd done, he was still her father, and she couldn't abandon him when he was scared and sick. I told Sarah that I understood her feelings, but that I couldn't and wouldn't support helping Frank. I reminded her of all the years of emotional abuse he'd put her through, how he'd made her childhood miserable, and how he'd treated both of us throughout our relationship. I said that Frank had made his choices for decades, and now he had to live with the consequences. Sarah broke down and said she knew Frank had been a terrible father, but that this was her chance to be the bigger person. She said she'd regret it for the rest of her life if something happened to him, and she hadn't tried to help. She begged me to put aside my feelings and support her through this. I told her that she was free to make her own choices about Frank, but that I wouldn't be participating. I said I wouldn't contribute money to his medical bills. I wouldn't have him in our house, and I wouldn't pretend to care about his well-being after everything he'd done to the person I love most. Sarah was devastated by my response. She said she felt like she was being forced to choose between her husband and her father. She accused me of being heartless and said that if the roles were reversed, she would support me no matter what. Frank's condition has gotten worse over the past few months. Sarah has been driving 3 hours each way twice a week to take him to appointments. She spent thousands of dollars on his medications and treatments. She's exhausted and stressed, and our relationship has suffered because she's constantly worried about him. Sarah's extended family has gotten involved, and they're all calling me heartless and cruel. Her aunt told me that family is supposed to forgive, and that I'm preventing Sarah from doing the right thing. Her cousin said that I'm being selfish and that a real husband would support his wife no matter what. Even some of our mutual friends think I'm being too harsh. They say that Frank is dying and that this is bigger than old grudges. They think I should put aside my personal feelings and help Sarah through this difficult time. But I can't get past everything Frank did to Sarah. I watched her go to therapy for years to deal with the trauma from her childhood. I've seen her have panic attacks when he calls. I've held her while she cried about feeling like she was never good enough for him. The man systematically destroyed her self-esteem and made her childhood a nightmare. Sarah is now talking about using our joint savings to pay for Frank's surgery. She says it's the only way to save his life, and that money doesn't matter compared to family. I've told her I won't agree to that, which has caused even more tension between us. Last week, Frank called me directly for the first time in years. He actually apologized for how he'd treated Sarah and me. He said he knew he'd been a terrible father and that he was sorry for all the pain he'd caused. He said he was trying to make amends and asked if I would help him rebuild his relationship with Sarah. I told him that his apology was decades too late and that actions have consequences. I said that Sarah was free to forgive him if she wanted, but that I would never forget what he put her through during the years when she needed a father most. Now Sarah barely speaks to me. She says I'm being vindictive and that I'm making the worst time of her life even harder. She thinks I should be supporting her unconditionally instead of making her choose between us. I love my wife more than anything, but I can't bring myself to help the man who spent years tearing her down and making her feel worthless. Am I the bad person for refusing to help my wife's father after everything he did? This story is absolutely heartbreaking because there's no clean resolution here. Frank spent decades being an abusive father and now wants forgiveness when he's facing his own mortality. The husband has watched his wife suffer from years of trauma caused by this man and can't bring himself to help him. Meanwhile, Sarah is caught between her loyalty to her husband and her complex feelings about her dying father. Sometimes, the people who hurt us most are also the ones we can't help but love, and that creates impossible situations like this one. Let's move to our next story, which deals with family financial expectations and assumptions that can destroy relationships. Am I the bad person for not paying for my sister's college? I'm 23 and my sister Kelly is 18. We grew up in a pretty typical middle-class family where money was always tight, but we had what we needed. Our parents always emphasized education and said they'd help us with college as much as they could, but that we'd need to contribute too. When I graduated high school, I knew college was going to be expensive and my parents could only help so much. So I spent my gap year working 2 jobs and saving every penny I could. I worked at a restaurant during the day and did overnight shifts at a warehouse. I lived at home, didn't go out with friends, and basically turned myself into a money-making machine. By the time I started college, I'd saved about $15,000. Combined with what my parents could contribute and some financial aid, I was able to get through my first 2 years without taking out any loans. During college, I continued working part-time and was very careful with my spending. I graduated last year with a degree in accounting and no student debt, which I'm really proud of. I got a good job right away and have been living in a small apartment and continuing to save money. I currently have about $25,000 in my savings account. Kelly, on the other hand, took a completely different approach to preparing for college. She spent her senior year of high school focused on social activities and didn't work at all. She applied to expensive private schools without really considering the cost. When she got accepted to her dream school, the tuition was $45,000 a year. Our parents sat down with Kelly and explained that they could contribute the same amount they'd given me, about $8,000 per year, but that she'd need to figure out the rest. They suggested she look into less expensive state schools or take a gap year to work and save money like I had done. Kelly was devastated and said that going to a cheaper school would ruin her life. She'd already told all her friends where she was going and had her heart set on this particular college. She said she couldn't possibly take a gap year because she'd fall behind her peers. That's when Kelly approached me about helping with her college costs. She said that since I'd been lucky enough to graduate without debt, I should help her avoid the same struggle. She pointed out that I was living cheaply and making good money, so I could afford to help family. I told Kelly that I hadn't been lucky. I'd worked incredibly hard and made sacrifices to avoid debt. I explained that I was saving money for my own future, including potentially buying a house, starting a family, or going back to school for an advanced degree. Kelly got upset and said that I was being selfish. She said that family should help each other and that I was letting money come between us. She accused me of not caring about her education or her future. Then my parents got involved. They said they understood my position, but hoped I would consider helping Kelly. They pointed out that I'd had advantages Kelly hadn't, like being older and having more time to prepare. They said that helping Kelly would be an investment in the family. Kelly then made her argument more specific. She said that since I'd saved money by living at home during my gap year and college summers, I owed some of that savings to the family. She claimed that my success was partly due to the support I'd received and that I should pay it forward. I was blown away by this logic. I pointed out that Kelly had also lived at home rent-free her entire life and had received the same family support I had. The difference was that I'd chosen to work and save, while she'd chosen to focus on other things. Kelly started crying and said that I was crushing her dreams over money. She said that if I really loved her, I'd want to help her succeed. She promised she'd pay me back after graduation, though she had no concrete plan for how that would work. My parents suggested a compromise where I could loan Kelly money for college at a low interest rate. They said this would help her avoid high-interest student loans while still respecting my financial boundaries. I thought about it for a few days, but ultimately decided against it. I knew that mixing money and family relationships could get complicated, and I wasn't confident Kelly would be able to pay me back. I also felt like lending her money would enable her lack of planning and personal responsibility. When I told Kelly my final decision, she exploded. She said I was heartless and selfish, and that I was destroying her future over money I didn't even need. She accused me of being jealous of her and wanting to keep her down. Kelly ended up taking out student loans and going to a state school instead of her dream college. She's constantly bitter about this and brings it up whenever we're together. She makes comments about how different her life would be if she'd had family support like I did. Our relationship has been strained ever since. Kelly barely speaks to me at family gatherings and has told our extended family that I refused to help her when she needed it most. Some relatives have taken her side and think I should have been more generous. My parents have stayed mostly neutral, but I can tell they wish I'd helped Kelly. They've made comments about how family money should benefit the whole family and that my success reflects well on everyone. Recently, Kelly found out that I'm looking at buying a house and she's furious. She said that I'm spending money on luxury items while she's drowning in student debt. She said that every dollar I spend on myself is a reminder of how I chose money over family. I feel bad that Kelly is struggling financially, but I also feel like she's responsible for her own choices. I worked hard and made sacrifices to avoid debt, and she chose a different path. I don't think I should have to pay for her decisions just because we're related. Am I the bad person for not paying for my sister's college? Kelly's sense of entitlement here is staggering. She spent her senior year partying while her brother worked 2 jobs to save for college, then expected him to bankroll her expensive dream school. The idea that his savings somehow belonged to the family because he lived at home is completely backwards. He earned that money through his own hard work and sacrifice. Kelly had the same opportunities but chose differently, and now she wants someone else to pay for those choices. The brother did exactly what he should have done by protecting his financial future and not enabling her lack of planning. Our next story involves family assumptions about generosity and the complicated dynamics that happen when relatives expect free access to your belongings. Am I the bad person for refusing to give my brother my old car? I'm 26 and my brother Marcus is 22. I've been driving the same Honda Civic for about 8 years, since I bought it used when I first started college. It's been a reliable car and I've taken really good care of it, but I finally saved up enough to buy something newer. I found a great deal on a certified pre-owned SUV that I'd been wanting for years. Better for my job, since I travel a lot, and honestly, just something I've been looking forward to as a reward for working hard and saving money. I was planning to sell the Honda to help offset the cost of the new car. Marcus has been complaining for months about having to take the bus to work and community college. He's been saying how much easier his life would be if he had a car, how he could pick up more shifts at his part-time job, how he wouldn't have to depend on our parents or friends for rides. When I mentioned that I was getting a new car and planning to sell the Honda, Marcus immediately assumed it would just go to him. He started talking about how excited he was to finally have his own transportation and how this would change everything for him. I told him that I was actually planning to sell the car because I needed the money to help pay for my new one. The Honda is still worth about $6,000, which would significantly reduce my monthly payments on the SUV. Marcus was shocked and said he couldn't believe I would sell the car instead of just giving it to him. He said that, as his older brother, I should want to help him succeed and that the money wasn't as important as family. He pointed out that $6,000 wouldn't make or break me, but that having a car would completely change his life. I explained that $6,000 was actually a lot of money to me, and that I'd worked hard to save up for my new car. I offered to sell him the Honda for a discounted price, maybe $4,000 instead of the full market value, but he said he didn't have that kind of money. Marcus got our parents involved, and they said they thought it would be nice if I helped him out. They pointed out that I'd gotten help from them when I was his age, like living at home rent-free during college summers and having them pay for my car insurance until I graduated. My mum said that now that I was doing well financially, it would be good karma to help Marcus get on his feet. She suggested that I could think of it as an investment in his future, since having a car would help him work more hours and potentially transfer to a better school. Marcus started getting more aggressive about it, saying I was being greedy and selfish. He said that keeping the car in the family made more sense than selling it to some stranger. He argued that I was already getting a big upgrade with my new car, so I should be satisfied with that. He also started bringing up times when I'd borrowed money from our parents or when they'd helped me out during college. He said that since the family had invested in my success, I owed it to help him now that I was in a position to do so. I felt guilty, but also frustrated that Marcus seemed to think he was entitled to my car just because we're related. I had worked 2 jobs during college to afford that car in the first place, and I'd maintained it carefully for 8 years. It wasn't like I had just been handed it for free. I decided to compromise and offered to loan Marcus the money to buy the car from me. He could pay me back over time, maybe $100 a month until it was paid off. This way, he'd get the car he needed, but I'd still get the money I was counting on. Marcus rejected this idea and said that if I really cared about him, I wouldn't make him pay for something I was just going to get rid of anyway. He said that charging family members for help was cold and calculating. Our parents were disappointed in my decision and said they'd raised me to be more generous. They said that money comes and goes, but family relationships last forever. They suggested that I should think about what was really important in life. Situation came to a head last week when Marcus found out I'd listed the car online. He called me furious, saying I was choosing strangers over family. He said that selling the car to someone else was a betrayal and that he'd never ask me for help again. I ended up selling the car to a nice family whose teenage daughter needed reliable transportation for work and school. They paid full asking price and were really grateful. But Marcus hasn't spoken to me since, and family dinners have been incredibly awkward. Some extended family members have heard about the situation and think I should have just given Marcus the car. They say that's what family does for each other, and that I was being petty by insisting on getting money for it. Am I the bad person for refusing to give my brother my old car? The entitlement here is mind-blowing. Marcus wanted a $6,000 car for free just because they're brothers. He had zero savings, no plan to pay for it, and got angry when offered a reasonable payment plan. The idea that family members should just hand over valuable assets because that's what family does is completely backwards. Marcus could have spent the months he was complaining about the bus actually working extra hours to save money for a car. Let's move to our next story about holiday expectations and family pressure. Am I the bad person for not hosting Thanksgiving? I'm 29, and for the past 5 years, I've been hosting Thanksgiving dinner for my entire extended family. It started small when I first got my own place, just my parents and siblings. But over time, it grew into this massive production with about 20 people, including aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends. I actually enjoyed hosting at first. I loved cooking and I was proud to have everyone gather at my house. But it's become completely overwhelming and expensive. I spend weeks preparing, hundreds of dollars on food, and my entire house gets destroyed. The cleanup takes days and I'm exhausted for a week afterward. This year, I decided I wanted to do something different. My job has been incredibly stressful lately, and I've been working overtime constantly. I've barely had a weekend to myself in months. I was looking forward to having a quiet, relaxing Thanksgiving for once. I called my mum in early October and told her that I wouldn't be hosting Thanksgiving this year. I said I needed a break and was planning to just stay home with my partner and maybe cook a simple meal for just the two of us. My mum was shocked and asked what had changed. I explained that hosting had become too much work and expense for me, and that I wanted to have a peaceful holiday for once. I suggested that maybe someone else could host, or we could do something smaller this year. My mum said that everyone was expecting to come to my house like always, and that it was too late to change plans. She said that Thanksgiving was about family, and that I was being selfish by prioritizing my own comfort over bringing everyone together. I told her that I'd been hosting for 5 years straight and had never asked anyone else to take turns or help with costs. I pointed out that I was spending my vacation time and my money to provide a free meal and entertainment for 20 people, and that I deserved a break. My mum got upset and said that hosting was an honour, and that I should be grateful to have family who wanted to spend time at my house. She said that cancelling at the last minute was inconsiderate and would ruin everyone's holiday plans. Then the guilt trips started coming from everyone. My aunt called and said that my house was the only place big enough for everyone to gather comfortably. My uncle said that I made the best turkey and that Thanksgiving wouldn't be the same without my cooking. My sister said that her kids had been looking forward to playing in my backyard and that I was disappointing them by backing out. My cousin pointed out that some family members were already planning to travel from out of state specifically to come to my house. Everyone kept emphasizing how much work it would be to find an alternative venue and how upset people would be if Thanksgiving was cancelled or moved. They made it sound like I was personally responsible for ruining the holiday for 20 people. I started to feel really guilty and wondered if I was being unreasonable. Maybe I could push through one more year and then make changes for next year. But then I thought about all the prep work I'd need to start doing immediately, and I felt exhausted just thinking about it. I tried to suggest compromises, like having it at someone else's house, but offering to cook the turkey, or having a potluck-style meal where everyone brought dishes. But my family shot down every alternative and said it wouldn't be the same. My mum finally said that if I wasn't going to host, then there probably wouldn't be a family Thanksgiving at all this year. She said that no one else had space or time to organise something at the last minute, and that I was forcing everyone to have a sad, lonely holiday. The emotional manipulation got worse when my grandmother got involved. She called me crying and said that at her age she didn't know how many more Thanksgivings she'd have with the family. She said that cancelling traditions was hurtful and that family should come first. I felt terrible and almost caved, but my partner pointed out that my family had gotten comfortable taking advantage of my generosity. They'd never offered to help with costs, never volunteered to clean up afterward, and never suggested taking turns hosting. They just expected me to provide everything year after year. I realised that if I gave in now, I'd be stuck hosting forever. My family would know that guilt trips and emotional manipulation would work to get me to do whatever they wanted. So I held firm and said that I would not be hosting Thanksgiving this year. I suggested that everyone could still get together somewhere else, or that people could celebrate with their immediate families instead. The backlash was intense. Several family members stopped talking to me entirely. Others made passive-aggressive comments about how I was destroying family traditions and being antisocial. My mum found a restaurant that could accommodate a large group for Thanksgiving dinner, but it was expensive, and several people complained about having to pay for their own meals. They kept making comments about how much better it would have been at my house. Some family members ended up not coming to the restaurant dinner and had separate celebrations instead, which only created more drama and further divided the family. Everyone blamed me for fracturing the gathering. Now it's been a few are still bringing months and people up how I ruined Thanksgiving. They're already asking about Christmas and making comments about hoping I'll be more considerate of family this year. Am I the bad person for not hosting Thanksgiving? 5 years of hosting 20 people with zero help or financial contribution from anyone else, and they have the nerve to call him selfish for wanting one quiet holiday. His family turned him into their personal catering service and then acted like he was destroying sacred traditions when he wanted a break. The restaurant comment really gets me. They complained about paying for their own food after mooching off his hospitality for half a decade. Sometimes setting boundaries means people will be angry, but that doesn't make the boundaries wrong. Moving on to a story about friendship boundaries and learning from past mistakes. Am I the bad person for not watching my friend's dog? My friend Sarah asked me to watch her dog, Rex, for a long weekend while she went out of town with her boyfriend. This might sound like a simple favour between friends, but there's history here that makes it complicated. About 6 months ago, Sarah asked me to watch Rex for a week while she went on vacation. I agreed because I like dogs and Rex seemed well behaved when I'd met him before. Sarah dropped him off at my apartment with his food, toys and bed, and promised he'd be no trouble at all. That week turned into an absolute nightmare. Rex destroyed my apartment. He chewed up my coffee table legs, tore holes in my couch cushions, and somehow knocked over a bookshelf, breaking several items that had sentimental value. He also had accidents all over my carpet despite Sarah telling me he was completely house-trained. When Sarah got back from vacation and saw the damage, she was apologetic but also defensive. She said that Rex had never behaved like that before, and that maybe he was just stressed about being in a new environment. She offered to pay for the damages, but said she couldn't afford to replace everything right away. I ended up spending about $800 getting my couch repaired, replacing damaged items, and having my carpets professionally cleaned. Sarah gave me $200 toward the costs and promised to pay the rest gradually. But 6 months later, I'm still waiting for the remaining $600. Every time I bring up the money, Sarah has an excuse. She's had car troubles, her rent went up, she had unexpected medical bills, her hours got cut at work. There's always something preventing her from paying me back, even though I see her posting on social media about going out to dinner, buying new clothes and taking weekend trips. So when Sarah asked me to watch Rex again last week, I immediately said no. I told her that I couldn't risk having my apartment damaged again, especially since she still owed me money from last time. Sarah got upset and said that she'd learned from the first experience and would make sure Rex was better prepared this time. She said she'd bring a crate for him and more of his familiar items so he wouldn't be as anxious. I explained that it wasn't just about the potential damage, but also about the fact that she hadn't followed through on paying me back for the previous damage. I said that I didn't feel comfortable doing her favours when she still owed me money. Sarah accused me of being petty and said that mixing money and friendship was toxic. She said that friends should help each other without keeping score, and that I was being unreasonable by holding the debt over her head. She pointed out that she had apologised and offered to pay, and that it wasn't her fault that Rex had behaved badly. She said that I was punishing both her and Rex for something that was essentially an accident. I tried to explain that while the dog's behaviour might have been unpredictable, her failure to pay me back as promised was a choice. I said that I'd been patient and understanding about her financial situation, but that I couldn't keep doing favours for someone who didn't honour their commitments. Sarah then tried a different approach and said that she was desperate because she couldn't afford to board Rex at a kennel. She said that this trip was really important for her relationship and that I was potentially sabotaging her happiness over money. She also mentioned that she'd watched my cat a few times in the past when I'd gone out of town, though those were just overnight stays and my cat had never caused any damage or problems. When I still refused, Sarah got angry and said that I was a terrible friend. She said that real friends would be willing to take risks to help each other and that I was being selfish and calculating. She ended up having to cancel her weekend trip because she couldn't find anyone else to watch Rex on short notice. She's been cold toward me ever since and has made several passive-aggressive comments about how some people can't be counted on when it matters. Some of our mutual friends think I should have given Sarah another chance, especially since she promised to be more careful this time. They say that friends make mistakes and that I should be more forgiving. Others understand my position and think Sarah took advantage of my kindness the first time. They point out that she still owes me money and hasn't shown that she's learned from the experience. Sarah has started telling people that I'm holding a grudge over an accident and that I'm not a supportive friend. She's making it sound like I'm being unreasonable and petty instead of protecting myself from being taken advantage of again. Am I the bad person for not watching my friend's dog? Sarah still owes her $600 from the last time her dog destroyed the apartment, but somehow the friend is supposed to be petty for saying no to round 2. The fact that Sarah can afford weekend trips and dining out but can't pay back her debt shows exactly where her priorities lie. True friends don't leave their friends hundreds of dollars in the hole and then act entitled to more favours. Sometimes protecting yourself from being repeatedly taken advantage of is more important than being the nice friend. Let's dive into our next story about living arrangements and what constitutes fair when it comes to shared expenses. Am I the bad person for refusing to split rent evenly? I'm 24 and I live in a 2-bedroom apartment with my roommate Jake, who's 26. We've been living together for about 8 months, and overall it's been a good situation, but we're having a disagreement about how to split the rent that's causing tension. When we first looked at apartments together, we found this place that was perfect for our budget and location needs. The total rent is $1,800 per month. The apartment has 2 bedrooms, but they're very different sizes. The master bedroom is probably twice the size of the second bedroom, has its own bathroom, and has a walk-in closet. The smaller bedroom shares the main bathroom with guests and has a tiny closet that barely fits anything. Jake automatically took the master bedroom when we moved in. I didn't really mind at the time because I figured we'd work out the rent split fairly based on what each of us was getting. I assumed that since Jake was getting the bigger room with more amenities, he'd pay a larger share of the rent. But when it came time to discuss finances, Jake said he thought we should split everything 50-50. He said that we were both renting the apartment equally, and that splitting based on room size would be too complicated. I disagreed and said that it didn't seem fair for me to pay the same amount when I was getting significantly less space and fewer amenities. I pointed out that if we were each renting separate apartments, Jake would definitely pay more for a master suite than I would pay for a small bedroom. Jake argued that we were sharing all the common areas equally, like the living room, kitchen, and dining area. He said that the bedrooms were just for sleeping anyway, and that the rest of the apartment was where we spent most of our time. I countered that the master bedroom wasn't just bigger, it also had a private bathroom, which meant I had to share the main bathroom with guests while he had his own space. I also pointed out that his walk-in closet was bigger than my entire bedroom. We went back and forth about this for weeks without reaching an agreement. I suggested that we split the rent 70-30 or 60-40 to account for the difference in what we were each getting. Jake said that was ridiculous and that roommates always split rent evenly. I did some research online and found that most advice about roommate situations recommended splitting rent based on room size and amenities when there's a significant difference. I showed Jake several articles and forum posts supporting this approach. Jake dismissed the research and said that people on the internet would say anything, and that in the real world, roommates split everything equally. He said that if I wanted a bigger room, I should have spoken up when we moved the fact. The situation got more heated when our first full month's rent was due. Jake sent me a Venmo request for $900, which was half the rent. I sent him $700 instead, which would be my share if we split it roughly 60-40. Jake was furious and said that I was trying to stiff him on rent. He said that we had an agreement to split everything equally and that I was going back on my word. I pointed out that we had never actually agreed on how to split rent, just that we'd figure it out. Jake threatened to find a new roommate if I didn't pay my full share. I told him that was fine with me, but that he'd have a hard time finding someone willing to pay $900 for the smaller bedroom when they could probably get a similar space elsewhere for less. We ended up having a huge argument where Jake accused me of being cheap and trying to take advantage of him. He said that I was making living together difficult to over a couple $100 per month. I tried to explain that it wasn't about the money itself, but about fairness. I said that I felt like Jake had taken advantage of my easygoing nature by claiming the better room and then expecting me to pay as if we were getting equal value. Jake's girlfriend got involved and said that I was being unreasonable and that most roommates she knew split rent 50-50 regardless of room differences. She said that I was creating unnecessary drama and that Jake was being generous by even living with someone who would nickel and dime him. I talked to some of my friends about the situation and got mixed responses. Some agreed that rent should be split based on what each person gets, especially when there's such a big difference in room size and amenities. Others thought I should just suck it up and pay half, since that's simpler and more common. The tension in our apartment has been really uncomfortable. Jake has been cold toward me and makes passive-aggressive comments about money and fairness. He's also started being petty about other shared expenses, like questioning whether I use more toilet paper or electricity than him. I'm starting to wonder if I should just pay the full $900 to keep the peace, but it also feels like I'd be setting a precedent that Jake can take advantage of me financially. Am I the bad person for refusing to split rent evenly? Jake grabbed the master bedroom with private bathroom and walk-in closet, then expected his roommate to pay the same rent for a space half the size. That's not how fair housing arrangements work. If you want equal payment, you get equal accommodations. Jake's girlfriend calling it nickel and dimming is rich when her boyfriend is literally trying to overcharge his roommate by hundreds of dollars monthly. The research showing this is standard practice for roommate situations just confirms what common sense already tells us. Our next story deals with workplace boundaries and the expectations people have about going above and beyond for colleagues. Am I the bad person for not helping my coworker move? My coworker Laura asked me to help her move apartments this weekend, and I said no. This has created some drama at work that's making me question whether I made the right decision. Laura and I work in the same department at a marketing firm. We're friendly at work and occasionally grab lunch together, but we don't really hang out outside of the office. We're co-workers who get along well, not close personal friends. Last Monday, Laura mentioned that she was moving to a new apartment over the weekend and was stressed about getting everything packed and transported. She said that moving companies were too expensive and that she was trying to do it herself with help from friends and family. On Wednesday, Laura directly asked if I could help her move on Saturday. She said she needed people with cars to help transport boxes and furniture, and that it would probably take most of the day. She offered to buy pizza and beer for everyone who helped. I told Laura that I couldn't help because I already had plans for the weekend. This was true. I had been looking forward to a rare weekend with no obligations after working overtime every day for the past 3 weeks. My job has been incredibly demanding lately. We're in the middle of a major project with impossible deadlines, and I've been staying late every night and working partial days on weekends. I'm exhausted and burned out, and I was really counting on having Saturday and Sunday to just relax and recharge. Laura pressed me about what my plans were, and I said I was just planning to stay home and rest. She seemed disappointed and said that she really needed help, especially from people with cars since several of her friends don't drive. I felt bad but explained that I'd been working crazy hours and really needed the time to decompress. I suggested she try renting a moving truck or asking family members to help. Laura said that renting a truck was expensive and that her family lived too far away to be practical. She said that she'd already asked several friends, but still needed more people to make the move manageable. On Thursday, Laura asked me again if I was sure I couldn't help. She said that even a few hours would make a big difference, and that she'd understand if I couldn't stay all day. She mentioned that some other co-workers had agreed to help and made it sound like it was becoming a team effort. I still said no and explained that I really needed the weekend to rest after working so much overtime. Laura seemed frustrated and said that she'd been working overtime too, but was still making time to handle her personal responsibilities. This comment bothered me because it implied that I wasn't handling my responsibilities properly, when really I was just prioritizing my mental health over helping with her move. On Friday, Laura was noticeably cold toward me. She gave me brief professional responses when we had to interact for work, but otherwise avoided talking to me. I could tell she was upset about my refusal to help. After work on Friday, one of our other co-workers mentioned that Laura had been complaining about me to several people. She'd been saying that I was selfish and unreliable, and that she was disappointed to learn I wasn't someone she could count on. Laura had also made comments about how she'd helped other people in the office with various things, and couldn't believe that no one was willing to sacrifice a Saturday to help her during a stressful time. This made me feel guilty and wonder if I should have just sucked it up and helped for a few hours. Maybe I could have managed to help for part of the day and still had some time to rest. But then I thought about how exhausted I'd been and how much I'd been looking forward to having no obligations. I'd already given up so many weekends for work lately, and this felt like the first time in months that I could actually relax. On Monday, Laura was still being cold toward me, and I could tell that other co-workers had heard about the situation. A few people gave me looks that suggested they thought I should have helped her. One co-worker asked me directly why I hadn't helped with Laura's move, and when I explained that I needed to rest after working so much overtime, they said that everyone had been working hard lately, but that we should still support each other. Another co-worker said that helping colleagues move was just part of being a good team member, and that I'd probably want help myself if I was in Laura's situation. Laura ended up getting enough help from other people to complete her move, but she's continued to be distant toward me. She's professional when necessary, but clearly isn't interested in being friendly anymore. I'm starting to feel like I made a mistake by not helping, especially since it's affected our working relationship and possibly my reputation with other co-workers. Am I the bad person for not helping my co-worker move? After working overtime every single day for 3 weeks, this person deserved a weekend to recover without guilt trips from a casual work acquaintance. Laura's move was her personal responsibility, not something her co-workers were obligated to sacrifice their rare free time for. The comment about handling personal responsibilities was particularly manipulative, as if taking care of your mental health rather than helping with someone else's move somehow reflected poorly on your own responsibility. Laura chose to make this a workplace drama by complaining to everyone, instead of just accepting that not everyone was available to help with her personal life. Let's move to a story about family financial boundaries and trust issues. Am I the bad person for not letting my dad use my credit card? I'm 25 and I've worked really hard to build good credit over the past few years. I have a credit card with a decent limit that I use responsibly and always pay off in full each month. My credit score is finally in the good range, and I'm proud of the financial discipline I've developed. My dad, Darren, has always been terrible with money. Throughout my childhood, we had constant financial stress because he would make impulsive purchases, rack up debt, and then struggle to pay bills. He's filed for bankruptcy twice and has had multiple credit cards maxed out or sent to collections. Despite being in his 50s, my dad still hasn't learned to manage money properly. He gets excited about get-rich-quick schemes, buys things we can't afford, and then acts surprised when there are consequences. My mum has tried to help him budget over the years, but he always finds ways around whatever systems they set up. Last month, my dad's car broke down and needed about $1,500 in repairs. He doesn't have that kind of money saved, and his credit is so bad that he can't get approved for a loan or a new credit card. My dad asked if he could use my credit card to pay for the car repairs. He promised he would pay me back within 2 months and said he just needed help bridging the gap until he got his next bonus at work. I told my dad that I wasn't comfortable putting that large of a charge on my credit card. I explained that I'd worked hard to build good credit and that I couldn't risk having a balance that might not get paid off on time. My dad got upset and said that he was asking for help from his own son during a genuine emergency. He pointed out that without his car, he couldn't get to work, which would make his financial situation even worse. I suggested that my dad could take out a personal loan, ask his employer for an advance, or look into financing options through the auto repair shop. He said he'd already tried these options and been rejected because of his poor credit history. My dad then said that family should help each other during hard times and that he'd done a lot for me over the years. He reminded me that he'd paid for my car insurance through college and had helped me with various expenses when I was getting started. I acknowledged that my parents had helped me in the past, but I also pointed out that this was different because it involved potentially damaging my credit score if something went wrong. I said that I'd be happy to help in other ways, like researching loan options or helping him create a budget. My dad accused me of being selfish and said that I was more concerned about my credit score than about his ability to get to work. He said that a good son would be willing to take some risk to help his father during an emergency. My mum got involved and said that while she understood my concerns, this was a legitimate emergency and that family should stick together. She said that my dad really was planning to pay me back and that his job was secure, so the risk was minimal. I still felt uncomfortable about it, especially knowing my dad's history with money. I'd seen him make promises about paying back debts before, only to get distracted by other expenses and leave people hanging. My dad then offered to give me collateral, like letting me hold on to some of his tools or electronics until he paid me back. I appreciated the gesture, but explained that it wasn't really about trust in his intentions, but about the practical risk to my credit. The situation escalated when my dad said that I was being ungrateful after everything he'd done for me. He brought up specific times he'd helped me financially and said that I was being hypocritical by not returning the favour when he needed it. My extended family got involved after my dad complained to them about my refusal to help. Several aunts and uncles called to say that they thought I should help my father and that good children don't abandon their parents during hard times. My grandmother was particularly critical and said that she was disappointed in how I was treating my father. She said that when she was young, children always helped their parents without question, and that my generation was too selfish. The family pressure made me feel terrible, and I started to wonder if I was being too cautious. Maybe I should trust that my dad would pay me back this time, especially since he seemed genuinely desperate. But then I remembered all the times throughout my childhood when my dad's financial decisions had caused stress for our whole family. I thought about how hard I'd worked to establish good credit and financial stability, and how one mistake could set me back significantly. My dad ended up borrowing money from my uncle to pay for the car repairs, but he's been cold toward me ever since. He makes comments about how some people only care about themselves and how disappointing it is when family lets you down. At family gatherings, there's been an uncomfortable tension where people seem to think I should have been more generous. Several relatives have made comments about how family should always come first and how money shouldn't matter more than relationships. Am I the bad person for not letting my dad use my credit card? Darren has filed bankruptcy twice and has a lifelong pattern of financial irresponsibility, but somehow his son is ungrateful for protecting his own credit score. The family guilt trip about good children helping their parents is manipulation. Good parents don't repeatedly put their kids in positions where they have to choose between financial security and family approval. This is exactly how generational cycles of financial dysfunction continue, with responsible family members getting pressured to enable the irresponsible ones. Let's move to our next story about relationship dynamics and household responsibilities. Am I the bad person for refusing to cook for my partner every night? I'm 28 and I've been living with my partner Alex for about 2 years. We both work full-time jobs with similar hours and stress levels, but we're having a disagreement about household responsibilities that's causing tension in our relationship. When we first moved in together, I enjoyed cooking and would often make dinner for both of us. I'm a decent cook and I found it relaxing after work to try new recipes and make nice meals. Alex appreciated this and would always compliment my cooking and thank me for making dinner. Over time, this became the standard routine. I would come home from work and start preparing dinner while Alex would relax, watch TV, or do other activities. Alex would usually clean up after dinner, so it felt like a fair division of labour initially. But as months went by, I started feeling like cooking every single night was becoming a burden. My job got more demanding, I was working longer hours, and I was often exhausted by the time I got home. The idea of immediately starting to cook dinner instead of having a few minutes to decompress was becoming stressful. I suggested to Alex that we could take turns cooking, maybe alternating days or weeks. I thought this would be a reasonable way to share the responsibility and give both of us variety in what we ate. Alex wasn't enthusiastic about this idea and said that cooking wasn't really their strong suit. They said they'd rather stick with our current arrangement where I cooked and they cleaned, since it played to our respective strengths. I pointed out that I hadn't been a great cook when I started either, but that I'd learned through practice and watching YouTube videos. I said that Alex could learn too if they made the effort. Alex argued that they worked just as many hours as I did, and that coming home to cook felt overwhelming. They said they'd rather pay for takeout on days when I didn't want to cook than try to prepare meals themselves. This frustrated me because getting takeout every other night would be expensive and unhealthy. I also felt like Alex was being lazy and expecting me to handle all the meal planning and preparation just because I'd been doing it voluntarily at first. I explained that what had started as me enjoying cooking had turned into an expectation that I would always be responsible for dinner. I said that I wanted us to share this responsibility like we shared other household tasks. Alex got defensive and said that they did plenty of other things around the house. They pointed out that they handled all the cleaning, took out the trash, and managed most of the household organisation and scheduling. I acknowledged that Alex did contribute in other ways, but I said that cooking dinner every single night was time-consuming and mentally exhausting. I had to plan meals, shop for groceries, prepare the food, and coordinate timing, while Alex just had to clean up afterward. Alex then said something that really bothered me. They said that cooking was my role in our relationship, and that couples naturally fell into different responsibilities based on their skills and preferences. I told Alex that I didn't want cooking to be my role if it meant I was the only one ever responsible for it. I said that I wanted us to be partners who shared responsibilities rather than falling into traditional gender roles by default. Alex seemed surprised by my reaction and said they hadn't meant it in a sexist way. They said they just thought we'd found a system that worked and didn't understand why I wanted to change it. I tried to explain that the system worked for Alex because they got to come home and relax while I immediately started working on dinner. I said that I wanted some nights where I could also come home and not have to think about cooking. Alex suggested that we could meal prep on weekends or buy more frozen meals that were quick to prepare. I said those were band-aid solutions and that I really wanted Alex to learn to cook some basic meals. The conversation got heated when Alex said that they'd never asked me to cook every night and that I'd volunteered to do it. They said that if I didn't want to cook anymore, I should have just said so instead of trying to force them to learn something they weren't interested in. I felt like Alex was being deliberately obtuse about the situation. Just because I'd started cooking voluntarily didn't mean I'd signed up to be the sole person responsible for dinner for the rest of our relationship. Alex finally agreed to try cooking once a week, but they made it clear they weren't happy about it. They said they'd probably just make simple things like pasta or sandwiches, and that I shouldn't expect restaurant-quality meals. The first time Alex cooked, they made spaghetti with jarred sauce and complained the entire time about how long it was taking and how they didn't know what they were doing. They acted like cooking pasta was some incredibly difficult task that required special skills. After dinner, Alex made comments about how their cooking wasn't as good as mine and how they'd rather just order pizza next time it was their turn. It felt like they were trying to sabotage the arrangement, so I'd go back to cooking every night. I told Alex that their attitude was making the situation worse and that they needed to approach cooking with a more positive mindset. I said that everyone starts as a beginner and improves with practice. Alex accused me of being controlling and said that I was forcing them to do something they didn't enjoy just because I was unhappy with our previous arrangement. They said that relationships required compromise and that I was being inflexible. Am I the bad person for refusing to cook for my partner every night? The "cooking is your role" comment reveals everything you need to know about Alex's mindset here. What started as one partner enjoying cooking somehow became a permanent life sentence to meal prep duty. Alex's deliberate incompetence with the spaghetti and complaints about not knowing what they're doing is classic weaponized helplessness, acting so bad at a task that the other person just gives up and does it themselves. Both partners work full-time. Both partners should be able to feed themselves like functional adults. Moving on to a story about friendship boundaries and financial history. Am I the bad person for not lending my friend money? My friend Ethan has been asking to borrow money from me, and I refused because of our history with loans. This has caused a big rift in our friendship, and I'm wondering if I made the right call. Ethan and I have been friends since college, about 8 years now. We've always had different approaches to money. I'm a saver who budgets carefully, while Ethan is more of a spender who lives paycheck to paycheck, despite making decent money. Over the years, Ethan has borrowed money from me several times. It started small, like $20 for lunch or gas money until his next paycheck. I was always happy to help, because these were small amounts and temporary situations. But the loans gradually got bigger and more frequent. Ethan would need a couple $100 to cover rent when he'd spent too much on entertainment. He'd need money for car repairs because he hadn't been maintaining his vehicle properly. There was always some crisis that required immediate financial help. The problem was that Ethan was terrible about paying me back. He'd promised to repay me by a certain date, but then that date would come and go without any mention of the money. When I'd bring it up, he'd apologise and ask for more time, usually because some new expense had come up. I started keeping track of these loans about 2 years ago when I realised I was losing track of how much Ethan owed me. According to my records, he's borrowed a total of about $2,000 from me over the past 3 years, and he's only paid back about $600 of that. The largest unpaid loan was $800 that Ethan asked me for $800 to cover rent and security deposit when he was moving to a new apartment. He said his current landlord was keeping his full security deposit unfairly and that he'd be stuck homeless without help. I felt bad for his situation and lent him the money, even though it was a significant amount for me at the time. That was 18 months ago, and Ethan still hasn't paid me back. Every time I bring it up, he has a new excuse. First, it was that his new job wasn't paying as much as expected. Then his car needed expensive repairs. Then he had medical bills from an emergency room visit. There's always something preventing him from paying me back. Meanwhile, I see Ethan posting on social media about going out to bars, taking weekend trips, and buying new clothes and gadgets. It's frustrating to see him spending money on entertainment and luxuries while owing me $800. Last month, Ethan asked if he could borrow another $500. He said his credit card was maxed out and he needed money to cover some unexpected expenses. He promised this would be the last time and that he'd pay back everything he owed within 3 months. I told Ethan that I couldn't lend him more money when he still owed me so much from previous loans. I explained that I felt taken advantage of and that our friendship had become one-sided financially. Ethan got defensive and said that I was being a bad friend by not helping him when he was in a tough spot. He said that he'd always intended to pay me back and that life had just been throwing him curveballs. I pointed out that it had been 18 months since the largest loan and that he hadn't made any effort to pay me back even small amounts. I said that if he could afford to go out drinking every weekend, he could afford to pay me $20 or $30 here and there. Ethan accused me of keeping track of his spending and being judgmental about how he lived his life. He said that just because he occasionally went out didn't mean he had extra money lying around. I tried to explain that it wasn't about judging his lifestyle, but about feeling like he was prioritizing everything else over paying me back. I said that if someone owes you money, you should at least try to pay it back gradually instead of continuing to spend on non-essentials. Ethan then said something that really bothered me. He said that I made more money than him and that the money I'd lent him wasn't as big a deal for me as it was for him. He implied that I should just write off the debt because I could afford to lose it. This made me angry because it completely ignored the principle of the situation. Whether or not I could afford to lose the money wasn't the point. The point was that he'd made promises to pay me back and hadn't honoured them. I told Ethan that I wasn't willing to lend him more money and that I needed him to start making payments on what he already owed. I suggested he could pay me $50 a month until the debt was cleared. Ethan said that $50 a month was unrealistic given his budget and that I was being unreasonable by putting pressure on him about money. He said that good friends don't keep score and that I was making our friendship transactional. I explained that I hadn't wanted to keep score, but that I'd had to start tracking things because he wasn't being responsible about repaying what he borrowed. I said that lending money to friends was supposed to be temporary help, not permanent gifts. Ethan ended up finding someone else to lend him the $500 he needed, but he's been cold toward me ever since our conversation. He's stopped inviting me to group activities and barely responds when I text him. Some of our mutual friends have heard about the situation and think I'm being too harsh. They say that Ethan is going through a rough patch and that I should be more understanding and patient about getting paid back. Others agree with my position and say that Ethan has been taking advantage of my generosity. They think he's been treating me like a personal bank account and that I was right to cut him off. The friendship feels damaged now, and I'm not sure if it can be repaired. I feel bad about losing a friend, but I also feel like I had to protect myself from being taken advantage of further. Am I the bad person for not lending my friend money? Ethan borrowed $2,000 over 3 years, paid back $600, and then had the nerve to call his friend transactional for wanting the money back. The comment about making more money so it shouldn't matter is pure manipulation. Real friends don't treat each other like personal ATMs and then get offended when the bank closes. Sometimes protecting your financial boundaries is more important than enabling someone's irresponsible behaviour. Let's move to our next story about family wedding dynamics and dealing with toxic relatives. Am I the bad person for not inviting my aunt to my wedding? I'm getting married in 3 months, and the guest list has been a source of family drama. The biggest issue is my decision not to invite my Aunt Hannah, which has caused a huge rift in my extended family. Hannah is my mum's younger sister, and she's always been difficult to be around. She has this habit of making cutting comments about people under the guise of being honest or helpful. She'll say things like, "That dress makes you look bigger than you are," or "I hope you're not planning to wear your hair like that to the wedding." But her favourite target has always been my mum. Hannah seems to resent that my mum has been more successful in her career and has a stable marriage. She constantly makes passive-aggressive comments about my mum's choices, her parenting, her appearance, and her lifestyle. At family gatherings, Hannah will make comments like, "Some people think they're better than everyone else," while looking directly at my mum. She'll bring up embarrassing stories from their childhood, or make jokes at my mum's expense that aren't really jokes at all. The worst incident happened at my cousin's wedding last year. During the reception, Hannah had been drinking and decided to give an impromptu speech. She started talking about how marriage was hard work and how some people were lucky to find someone who would put up with their flaws. Then she looked right at my mum and said, "Like my sister, who's always been high maintenance but somehow found a man willing to deal with her drama." She went on to make several more comments about my mum being difficult and demanding. My mum was humiliated and ended up leaving the wedding early in tears. My dad was furious and told Hannah that her behaviour was unacceptable. Hannah just laughed and said she was being honest and that my mum needed to develop a thicker skin. That incident was the final straw for me. I decided that I didn't want Hannah at my wedding because I couldn't trust her not to say something hurtful to my mum on what's supposed to be one of the happiest days of our lives. When I told my mum about my decision, she was touched but also worried about the family drama it would cause. She said she could handle Hannah for one day if it meant keeping peace in the family. I told my mum that she shouldn't have to handle anyone on my wedding day. I said that my wedding was supposed to be a celebration with people who love and support us, not a day where we have to manage difficult relatives. When word got out that Hannah wasn't invited, the family reactions were intense. Several aunts and uncles called to say I was being divisive and that family should stick together despite their differences. My grandmother was particularly upset and said that weddings are supposed to bring families together, not split them apart. She said that Hannah might say thoughtless things sometimes, but that she doesn't mean any real harm. Hannah herself called me crying and said she was devastated to be excluded from such an important family event. She said she'd always loved me, like her own daughter, and couldn't believe I would shut her out over some misunderstandings. She promised that she would be on her best behaviour and wouldn't say anything that could be construed as negative. She said she'd even apologise to my mum if that's what it took to be invited to the wedding. Several family members have been pressuring me to reconsider. They say that Hannah has been part of all the major family milestones and that it will be obvious and hurtful for her to be the only one not invited. My cousin, whose wedding Hannah disrupted last year, even called to say that maybe I was overreacting. She said that Hannah's speech was inappropriate, but that it was just one night and that I shouldn't let it affect such a big decision. But I keep thinking about my mum and how Hannah's comments have affected her over the years. I've watched my mum's confidence get chipped away by Hannah's constant criticism and passive-aggressive remarks. I've also thought about what would happen if Hannah did say something hurtful during my wedding. It would ruin the day not just for my mum, but for me and my husband too. I'd always remember that someone used our wedding as an opportunity to hurt someone I love. My mum has started saying that maybe she should skip the wedding to avoid causing family drama. This breaks my heart because my mum is one of the most important people in my life, and I can't imagine getting married without her there. I told my mum that Hannah was the problem, not her, and that I wasn't going to let Hannah drive her away from my wedding. I said that if the family wanted to be angry at someone, they should be angry at Hannah for creating this situation in the first place. The wedding is getting closer, and the family pressure is intensifying. People are saying that I'm being stubborn and that I should prioritise family unity over personal grudges. But I don't think it's a personal grudge to want to protect my mum from someone who has repeatedly hurt her. I think it's reasonable to want my wedding to be a drama-free celebration with people who actually care about our happiness. Am I the bad person for not inviting my aunt to my wedding? Hannah spent years systematically tearing down her sister, culminated it with a public humiliation at another family wedding, and now everyone's shocked that she's not invited to the next one. The family calling it divisive to exclude someone who literally uses family events to hurt people is backwards thinking. A wedding isn't group therapy, where you have to invite toxic people and hope they behave. Sometimes protecting the people you love means disappointing the people who enable bad behaviour. Our next story deals with childcare expectations and family obligations during personal time. Am I the bad person for refusing to babysit my niece? My sister asked me to watch her 4-year-old daughter Emma this weekend, and I said no. This has led to a big argument about family responsibilities and whether I'm being selfish with my time. I work as a nurse at a busy hospital, which means I'm on my feet for 12-hour shifts, dealing with high-stress situations constantly. My schedule is pretty demanding. I usually work 3 or 4 shifts per week, but they're long and emotionally draining days. This weekend is the first time in about 6 weeks that I have 2 full days off in a row. I've been looking forward to it for weeks because I desperately need time to rest and recharge. I had planned to sleep in, do some cleaning that I've been putting off, maybe read a book, and just have some quiet time to myself. My sister called on Wednesday, asking if I could watch Emma on Saturday. She said she and her husband wanted to go to a wedding for one of his co-workers, and that their usual babysitter had cancelled at the last minute. I told my sister that I couldn't watch Emma because I really needed this weekend to rest after working so much. I explained that I'd been pulling extra shifts lately and was completely exhausted. My sister seemed frustrated and said that it was just one day and that Emma is a good kid who wouldn't be any trouble. She pointed out that the wedding was important for her husband's career and that they'd already RSVP'd yes. I sympathised with their situation, but explained that as much as I love Emma, watching a 4-year-old isn't exactly restful. Even well-behaved kids require constant attention and energy, and I just didn't have it to give right now. My sister then said that she was disappointed because family should help each other out during emergencies. She said that she'd watched my cat several times when I'd gone out of town and that she'd expected me to return the favour when she needed help. I pointed out that watching a cat for a weekend was very different from watching a preschooler for an entire day. A cat basically takes care of itself. You just need to make sure it has food and water. A 4-year-old needs constant supervision, entertainment, and care. My sister got more upset and said that I was making excuses because I didn't want to help her. She said that she rarely asks me for favours and that this was really important to her. I tried to suggest alternatives, like asking our parents or other family members to watch Emma, or seeing if they could find a different babysitter. My sister said that our parents were out of town and that it was too late to find someone else reliable. She then offered to pay me to babysit, as if the issue was about money rather than my need to rest. I explained again that it wasn't about compensation. I was genuinely too tired to take care of a young child properly. My sister accused me of being selfish and said that she couldn't believe I wouldn't help her during a genuine emergency. She said that missing this wedding could hurt her husband's relationships at work and that I was being inconsiderate of their needs. I felt bad about their situation, but also frustrated that my need for rest wasn't being taken seriously. I work in healthcare, and being exhausted affects not just me, but also my ability to provide good patient care. My sister ended up having to miss the wedding because she couldn't find alternative childcare. She's been cold toward me ever since and has made several comments about how I let her down when she really needed help. Our mum got involved and said that while she understood I was tired, sometimes family obligations come first. She said that my sister rarely asks for help and that I should have made an exception for something so important. My sister has been telling other family members about the situation, and several relatives have reached out to say they think I should have helped her. They're saying that one day of babysitting wouldn't have killed me and that I was being unnecessarily rigid. Some family members have pointed out that my sister has helped me in various ways over the years and that relationships should be reciprocal. They think I was being ungrateful by not returning the favour when she needed it. I'm starting to feel guilty about my decision, but I also know that I was genuinely exhausted and needed that time to recover. I'm worried that if I had agreed to babysit while feeling so drained, I might not have been able to give Emma the attention and care she deserved. The situation has created ongoing tension in my family, and I'm wondering if I should have just pushed through my exhaustion to help my sister. Am I the bad person for refusing to babysit my niece? After working 12-hour shifts on her feet dealing with life and death situations, this nurse deserved her first weekend off in 6 weeks, without guilt trips about family obligations. Watching a 4-year-old when you're completely burned out isn't just about being tired, it's about being able to provide safe, attentive care to a child. The sister comparing cat sitting to babysitting shows how little she understands about either childcare or her sister's demanding job. Sometimes saying no to family is the responsible thing to do. Let's move to our next story about family relationships and the complicated dynamics that happen when siblings grow apart. Am I the bad person for not helping my sister after her divorce? My sister Rachel is going through a difficult divorce and has been asking for various types of support from me. I've been reluctant to help, which has caused tension in our family and made me question whether I'm being too harsh. Rachel and I are both in our 30s now, but we haven't had a close relationship for many years. Growing up, we were typical siblings with the usual rivalries and disagreements, but nothing too serious. However, our relationship changed significantly when we became adults. When I got married 8 years ago, Rachel barely participated in my wedding planning. She showed up to the ceremony, but seemed distracted and uninterested. She left the reception early, without saying goodbye, claiming she had other plans. When my wife and I bought our first house, I called Rachel excited to share the news. Her response was lukewarm at best. She made a few comments about how expensive real estate was getting and didn't seem genuinely happy for us. When we had our first child 3 years ago, Rachel visited once in the hospital for about 20 minutes. She hasn't made much effort to build a relationship with my daughter since then, despite living only an hour away. Throughout these years, Rachel has been focused on her own life and relationships. She got married around the same time I did, and her world seemed to revolve entirely around her husband and his social circle. She rarely called or visited, and when she did, the conversations felt forced and superficial. I tried to maintain a relationship with Rachel for several years, calling regularly and inviting her to family gatherings. But it became clear that the effort was mostly one-sided. She seemed to view our relationship as an obligation rather than something she valued. Gradually, I stopped reaching out as much. If Rachel wanted to be distant, I decided I wouldn't keep pushing for a closer relationship. We settled into a pattern of polite but minimal contact, mostly communicating through our parents. 6 months ago, Rachel's marriage started falling apart. Her husband had been having an affair and wanted a divorce. Rachel was devastated and suddenly started reaching out to family members for support, including me. Rachel called me crying several times, wanting to talk about her relationship problems and get advice about the divorce proceedings. She asked if I could help her find a good lawyer and wanted me to loan her money for legal fees. I listened to her concerns and offered some general support, but I wasn't eager to get deeply involved in her divorce drama. I suggested she talk to our parents or close friends about the emotional aspects, and I declined to lend her money. Rachel seemed surprised by my lukewarm response and said she'd expected more support from her only brother during the worst time of her life. She pointed out that family should stick together during crises. I told Rachel that while I was sorry she was going through a difficult time, we hadn't been close for years, and it felt awkward for her to suddenly expect intensive support from me now. Rachel got upset and said that blood family was supposed to be there for each other, regardless of how much contact we'd had recently. She said that divorces were traumatic experiences that required all the help someone could get. I explained that I didn't feel comfortable being her primary source of emotional support when we'd barely spoken for months at a time over the past several years. I said that support systems needed to be built over time, not activated only during emergencies. Rachel accused me of being cold and holding grudges. She said that just because we hadn't been super close didn't mean I should abandon her when she really needed help. Our parents got involved and said that they thought I should be more supportive of Rachel during her divorce. They pointed out that she was going through a major life crisis and that this was when family support mattered most. My mum said that siblings sometimes drift apart during their 20s and 30s, but that didn't mean the family bond wasn't still important. She thought I should put aside any hurt feelings and focus on helping Rachel through this difficult period. I tried to explain that it wasn't about hurt feelings or grudges, but about the practical reality that Rachel and I didn't have the kind of close relationship that would make me her natural support person during a crisis. My dad said that family relationships could be rebuilt and that helping Rachel now might actually bring us closer together. He suggested that this crisis could be an opportunity to repair our relationship. Rachel has been reaching out more frequently, asking for help with various aspects of her divorce. She wants me to help her move out of her marital home, provide emotional support during difficult conversations with her ex-husband, and loan her money for temporary housing. I've been politely declining most of these requests, which has made Rachel increasingly frustrated with me. She's been telling our parents that I'm being unsupportive and selfish during her time of need. Some extended family members have heard about the situation and think I should be doing more to help Rachel. They say that divorce is one of the most stressful life events and that she needs all the family support she can get. Am I the bad person for not helping my sister after her divorce? Rachel spent years being a distant, disinterested sister who couldn't be bothered to engage with her brother's major life events, but now expects him to drop everything and become her emotional support system during her crisis. You can't phone in a relationship for years and then suddenly activate the family emergency clause when it's convenient for you. Relationships require ongoing investment, not just crisis intervention. The parents suggesting this could rebuild their bond are missing the point. Healthy relationships are built on mutual care and consistency, not one person rescuing the other when their world falls apart. Moving to our next story about neighbour relationships and the expectations people have about sharing belongings. Am I the bad person for not letting my neighbour borrow my tools? My neighbour has been asking to borrow various tools from me over the past year, and I recently decided to stop lending them out. This has created tension in our neighbourhood and made me question whether I'm being too rigid about my possessions. I live in a suburban neighbourhood where most people are friendly and occasionally help each other out with small favours. My neighbour Tom lives next door with his wife and 2 teenage kids. They seem like a nice family, and we've had pleasant conversations over the years. About 18 months ago, Tom knocked on my door asking if he could borrow a power drill to hang some pictures. I was happy to help and lent him the drill for the afternoon. He returned it promptly and thanked me for helping him out. Over the following months, Tom started asking to borrow tools more frequently. He needed a circular saw for a deck project, hedge trimmers for his yard work, a pressure washer to clean his driveway. Each time, I agreed to lend him what he needed because it seemed neighbourly, and I wasn't using the tools at the time. The problem started when Tom began keeping tools longer than expected. He'd ask to borrow something for a weekend project, but then keep it for a week or 2. Sometimes, I'd need the tool myself and have to go ask for it back. There were also issues with how Tom returned my tools. Sometimes they'd come back dirty or not properly maintained. My hedge trimmers came back with the blades dull and covered in tree sap. My pressure washer was returned with the tank still dirty and the hose tangled up. The final straw came when Tom borrowed my expensive miter saw for what he said was a quick project. He kept it for 3 weeks, and when I finally asked for it back, I discovered that one of the safety guards had been damaged and the blade needed to be replaced. When I mentioned the damage to Tom, he apologised but said that stuff like that happens with power tools and that he couldn't have prevented it. He offered to pay for the replacement blade, but seemed to think the safety guard issue was just normal wear and tear. I had the saw repaired, which cost about $80, and Tom did reimburse me for the blade. But the experience made me realise that lending out expensive tools came with risks I wasn't comfortable taking. The next time Tom asked to borrow something, I politely declined and said that I'd decided to stop lending out my tools. I explained that I'd had some issues with damage and maintenance and preferred to keep my tools available for my own projects. Tom seemed surprised and a little hurt by my response. He said he understood about the miter saw incident, but that it had been an accident and that he'd paid for the repairs. He asked if we could continue the arrangement with less expensive tools. I told Tom that it wasn't just about the money, but about the inconvenience of not having my tools available when I needed them and the stress of worrying about potential damage. I said that I'd rather just keep things simple by not lending them out anymore. Tom said he was disappointed because he'd found our tool sharing arrangement really helpful, especially for projects that only required occasional use of expensive equipment. He pointed out that buying all these tools himself would be expensive and wasteful. I sympathised with his situation, but explained that my tools were a significant investment for me, and that I needed to protect that investment. I suggested he could rent tools from the hardware store for bigger projects. Tom seemed to take my decision personally and started being less friendly in our interactions. He'd give me brief nods instead of stopping to chat when we saw each other outside. His wife also seemed cooler toward me. Word apparently got around the neighbourhood about our situation because another neighbour mentioned that she'd heard Tom was having trouble finding tools to borrow. She made a comment about how neighbours should help each other out when possible. I started to feel like I was being perceived as the unfriendly, selfish neighbour who wouldn't share with people in need. Some neighbours seemed to be avoiding asking me for favours as if they were afraid I'd say no to everything. Tom's teenage son asked if he could borrow a basic hand tool for a school project, and when I hesitated, Tom told him never mind, and that they'd figure something else out. The interaction was awkward and made me feel bad about the whole situation. I began wondering if I was being too protective of my possessions and whether good neighbours should be more willing to share resources. Maybe the occasional damage or inconvenience was just part of living in a community. But then I thought about the money I'd invested in quality tools and how frustrating it was to not have them available when I needed them for my own projects. I also considered the stress of constantly worrying about whether borrowed items would come back in good condition. That story ends there, and Tom learned that actions have consequences when it comes to borrowing expensive equipment. You can't damage someone's tools and then act surprised when they stop lending them to you. The neighbourhood pressure to be the sharing neighbour doesn't override someone's right to protect their investments. Sometimes being a good neighbour means respecting other people's boundaries instead of expecting unlimited access to their stuff. This next story comes from someone dealing with a family situation that's been decades in the making. Am I the bad person for refusing to pay for my wife's father's rehab? I'm 34 and I've been married to my wife Emma for 6 years. Her father has been an alcoholic for as long as I've known him, and according to Emma, he's been drinking heavily since she was a child. This isn't just casual drinking we're talking about. This man has put Emma's family through absolute hell for over 20 years. When Emma was growing up, her father would disappear for days at a time on drinking binges. He'd come home drunk and angry, screaming at Emma and her mother over the smallest things. He missed every important milestone in Emma's life. Her high school graduation, her college graduation, our wedding. He was either too drunk to attend or caused such a scene that he had to be removed. Emma has told me stories about hiding in her bedroom as a child while he threw furniture around the living room during his rages. The financial damage he's caused over the years is staggering. He's borrowed money from Emma's mother countless times, promising to pay it back and get sober, only to spend it all on alcohol. He cost Emma's mother her house when he took out a second mortgage without telling her and drank away all the money. Emma had to drop out of college temporarily to work 2 jobs just to help her mother avoid homelessness. Throughout our entire relationship, Emma's father has been nothing but hostile toward me. He's made racist comments about my background, questioned why Emma would marry someone like me, and has never once tried to build any kind of relationship with me. At family gatherings, he either ignores me completely or makes passive-aggressive comments designed to make me uncomfortable. Emma always apologizes afterward, but it never stops happening. Last month, Emma's father was arrested for his third DUI. This time, he crashed his car into a family's mailbox and nearly hit their young daughter, who was playing in the yard. The judge gave him a choice: jail time or mandatory rehabilitation. His insurance won't cover the full cost of the rehab program, and he needs about $15,000 to cover the difference. Emma's mother called us crying, begging us to help pay for the rehab. She said this was his last chance to get clean, and that if we didn't help, he'd end up in prison. Emma was torn up about it and came to me asking if we could use our savings to cover the cost. We've been saving that money for a down payment on our first house, something we've been working toward for 3 years. I told Emma absolutely not. I explained that her father has had countless opportunities to get help over the past 20 years and has chosen alcohol every single time. I pointed out that he's never shown any genuine remorse for the pain he's caused our family, never apologized for his behavior, and has never made any real effort to change. I said I wasn't going to reward his destructive behavior by bailing him out with our hard-earned money. Emma understood my reasoning, but she's still conflicted. She keeps saying that maybe this time will be different, that rock bottom might finally motivate him to get serious about sobriety. She's worried that if we don't help and something happens to him, she'll never forgive herself. Her mother has been calling daily, alternating between guilt trips about abandoning family and promises that he's really changed this time. The pressure from Emma's family has been intense. Her mother told her that I'm controlling and that I'm preventing Emma from helping her own father. Her aunt called me selfish and said that real men take care of their wives' families. Even some of our friends have suggested that $15,000 is a small price to pay if it means saving someone's life. But I've stood firm in my decision. I've seen this cycle too many times before. Emma's father will go to rehab, probably do well for a few weeks or months, and then relapse as soon as he faces any real stress or temptation. Then we'll be out $15,000 with nothing to show for it, except another round of broken promises and disappointments. I've told Emma that if her father wants to prove he's serious about getting sober, he can figure out how to pay for rehab himself. He can sell his car, ask other family members for help, or work with the facility to set up a payment plan. I'm not going to sacrifice our future home to fund another one of his failed attempts at sobriety. Emma has been quiet and distant since our conversation. She says she understands my position, but wishes I could find it in my heart to give her father one more chance. She started looking into whether we could take out a loan to cover the rehab costs, which has led to more arguments between us about enabling her father's behaviour. The whole situation is putting a strain on our marriage, and I'm starting to wonder if I'm being too harsh. Maybe I should support my wife, even if I don't believe her father will actually get clean this time. But every time I think about giving in, I remember all the years of abuse Emma endured and all the promises he's broken. I just can't bring myself to reward that behaviour with $15,000 of our money. That story ends there, and honestly, this is one of those situations where you can feel the weight of decades of family trauma. This isn't just about money, it's about enabling destructive behaviour versus supporting someone you love who's caught in the middle. After 20 years of broken promises and abuse, expecting someone to fund another attempt feels like throwing good money after bad. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's self-destruction, even when it breaks your partner's heart. Let's move to our next story, which involves friendship boundaries during one of life's most difficult transitions. Am I the bad person for not letting my friend crash on my couch during his divorce? I'm Kelly, I'm 28, and I live alone in a small one-bedroom apartment in the city. My friend Jake and I have known each other since college, and we've always had a solid friendship. He's been married to his wife Sarah for about 4 years, and from the outside, they seemed like they had a pretty good relationship. About 2 months ago, Jake called me completely distraught. He told me that Sarah had asked him for a divorce, and that she wanted him out of their shared apartment immediately. Apparently, she'd been unhappy in their marriage for over a year, and had finally decided she couldn't continue living together while they figured out the divorce proceedings. Jake was blindsided by the whole thing and had nowhere to go. Jake asked if he could crash on my couch for what he said would be just a few days, while he figured out his next steps. He promised he wouldn't be in the way, and that he just needed a temporary place to land while he processed everything that was happening. I felt terrible for him and immediately said yes. Going through a divorce is devastating, and I wanted to be there for my friend during one of the worst times of his life. The first week wasn't too bad. Jake was quiet and kept to himself mostly. He'd come home from work, eat dinner quietly, and spend most of his time on phone calls with lawyers or scrolling through apartment listings on his laptop. He seemed genuinely motivated to find his own place quickly, and I thought this arrangement would be over soon. But as the days turned into weeks, Jake's behaviour started to change. He began treating my apartment like it was his own place. He'd invite other friends over without asking me first, leaving my small living room crowded with people when I got home from work. He started eating my food without replacing it and leaving his belongings scattered throughout my apartment. My bathroom counter became cluttered with his toiletries, and he'd leave wet towels on my bedroom floor. The worst part was that Jake seemed to be settling in rather than actively looking for his own place. When I'd ask him about apartment viewings or his housing search, he'd get defensive and say that finding the right place takes time. He started making comments about how convenient it was living so close to his favourite bars and how much money he was saving by not paying rent. It became clear that what was supposed to be a temporary emergency situation was turning into a long-term living arrangement that I'd never agreed to. After about 6 weeks of this, I sat Jake down and told him that I needed a timeline for when he'd be moving out. I explained that while I wanted to support him through his divorce, my small apartment wasn't designed for 2 people, and the situation was starting to affect my own mental health. I need my space to decompress after work, and having a house guest indefinitely was becoming overwhelming. Jake got angry and accused me of abandoning him when he needed me most. He said that real friends stick by each other during crisis situations, and that asking him to leave showed I didn't actually care about his well-being. He pointed out that he was going through the worst time of his life, and couldn't understand why I was adding more stress by pressuring him to move out. I tried to explain that setting boundaries didn't mean I didn't care about him. I offered to help him look at apartments, to provide references for rental applications, and to continue supporting him emotionally even after he moved out. But I was firm that he needed to find his own place within the next 2 weeks. Jake's response was to essentially ignore my request. He continued living in my apartment as if nothing had changed, making no visible effort to find alternative housing. When I brought it up again, he'd either change the subject or guilt-trip me about how difficult apartment hunting was while dealing with divorce proceedings. Finally, I gave him a formal written notice that he had 1 week to find somewhere else to stay. I felt terrible doing it, but I realised that being too accommodating was actually enabling him to avoid taking responsibility for his own housing situation. Jake was furious and said I was kicking him while he was down. He packed his things and left, but not before telling me that I was a terrible friend and that he'd never forget how I'd treated him during his lowest point. Since then, our mutual friends have been divided. Some understand that 6 weeks is more than reasonable for emergency housing, and that I had every right to want my space back. Others think I should have been more flexible given what Jake was going through, and that good friends make sacrifices for each other during crisis situations. Jake has been telling people that I abandoned him when he needed me most and that I chose my comfort over his well-being. He's found a place to live now. Apparently he'd actually had several viable options for weeks, but hadn't wanted to commit to any of them while he had free housing at my place. This has made me even more frustrated because it confirmed my suspicion that he was taking advantage of my kindness, rather than genuinely struggling to find housing. I miss my friendship with Jake, but I don't regret setting boundaries. I think there's a difference between being supportive during a crisis and allowing someone to take advantage of your generosity indefinitely. That story's finished, and wow, this really shows how quickly emergency help can turn into long-term exploitation. 6 weeks is more than generous for couch surfing, especially when someone starts treating your home like their personal crash pad. The fact that Jake had other housing options available but chose to guilt-trip his friend instead of taking responsibility speaks volumes about his character. Sometimes being a good friend means setting boundaries, not becoming someone's permanent safety net. Moving on to our next story, about family relationships and respect. Am I the bad person for throwing away my sister's wedding invitations? I'm Marcus, I'm 26, and I'm transgender. I transitioned about 4 years ago and have been living as my authentic self ever since. Most of my family has been supportive of my transition, but my older sister Jenna has always struggled with accepting my identity. She still uses my dead name occasionally and misgenders me, especially when she's upset or frustrated. Jenna got engaged last year to her longtime boyfriend Dave, and they've been planning a wedding for this coming summer. Throughout the planning process, she's made several comments about the wedding being a traditional family celebration and has hinted that she expects everyone to present themselves in a way that won't cause drama or confusion for the extended family and her fiancé's relatives. About 3 months ago, Jenna asked me to be in her wedding party. I was actually touched that she wanted to include me and said yes immediately. We went dress shopping together for the bridesmaids, and while it was a bit awkward navigating the gendered aspects of wedding party traditions, we seemed to work things out. Jenna said she wanted me there regardless of what anyone else thought, and I felt like maybe we were finally making progress in our relationship. 2 weeks ago, Jenna sent out the official wedding invitations to all the guests. When mine arrived in the mail, I was shocked to see that she had addressed it using my dead name. Not just on the envelope, but throughout the entire invitation. The response card, the dinner menu, even the little insert about hotel accommodations. Everything used the name I'd legally changed 4 years ago. I called Jenna immediately to ask if this was a mistake. She got defensive and said that she'd used my legal name from when she'd started planning the wedding. I explained that I'd legally changed my name years ago and that using my dead name was hurtful and disrespectful. She said that some of our older relatives wouldn't know who the invitation was referring to if she used my chosen name, and that she didn't want to deal with confusion or questions on her wedding day. I told her that she needed to send out corrected invitations with my actual name on them. Jenna said it was too late to reprint everything and that I was being unreasonable by making such a big deal out of something so small. She said that everyone knows who I am regardless of what name is printed on the invitation, and that I should focus on celebrating her special day instead of creating drama over paperwork. That conversation ended badly, with both of us hanging up frustrated. I spent the weekend thinking about how to handle the situation. I realised that if I attended the wedding with invitations that dead-named me, I'd be essentially endorsing that treatment and signalling to our family that it was acceptable to disrespect my identity. I made the decision to throw away the invitations, all of them, mine plus the extras that Jenna had given me to distribute to a few family friends. I put them straight in the trash and decided not to attend the wedding unless Jenna was willing to acknowledge my identity properly. When Jenna found out what I'd done, she was absolutely furious. She called me screaming about how I'd sabotaged her wedding and forced her to reprint invitations at the last minute. She said I was being selfish and making her wedding all about me instead of supporting her on her special day. She accused me of trying to ruin her relationship with our extended family by forcing her to take sides. Our parents got involved and tried to mediate. They suggested that maybe I could attend the wedding even with the incorrect invitations, and that we could address the name issue privately after the celebration was over. They said that boycotting Jenna's wedding over what they called a printing error was an overreaction that would damage our family relationships permanently. But I stood firm. I told them that this wasn't just about a printing error. It was about basic respect for who I am. I'd been patient with Jenna's adjustment to my transition for years, but using my dead name on official wedding invitations crossed a line. I said that if she wanted me at her wedding, she needed to acknowledge my identity properly, and if she couldn't do that, then I wouldn't be attending. Jenna ended up having to reprint a portion of the invitations, which cost her several $100s in rush fees. She's been telling everyone that I ruined her wedding planning over something petty and that I care more about political correctness than family harmony. Several relatives have reached out to tell me that I should apologize and that Jenna was just trying to avoid confusion, not hurt my feelings. The wedding is next month, and Jenna and I still haven't resolved this situation. She sent me a new invitation with my correct name, but she did it grudgingly and made it clear that she felt forced into it. I'm planning to attend the wedding, but our relationship feels more strained than ever. She keeps making comments about how I made her wedding planning more difficult and expensive than it needed to be. I don't regret throwing away those invitations, but I do feel sad that standing up for myself has created so much family drama. I just wanted my sister to respect my identity on one of the most important days of her life. That story ends here. This hits so hard because it's about fundamental respect and recognition of someone's identity. Using someone's dead name isn't just a minor oversight, it's a denial of who they are as a person. The fact that Jenna tried to frame this as Marcus being dramatic instead of acknowledging her own disrespect shows exactly why he needed to take such a strong stand. Sometimes protecting your dignity requires making decisions that other people will call dramatic, but that doesn't make those decisions wrong. Let's dive into our next story about workplace boundaries and the expectations we place on co-workers. Am I the bad person for refusing to drive my co-worker home after midnight shifts? I work at a 24-hour call centre, and I usually work the night shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills, and the overnight differential makes it worth dealing with difficult customers all night long. About 8 months ago, a new employee named Jessica started working the same shift. She seemed nice enough during training, and we hit it off pretty well during our breaks. Jessica mentioned during her first week that she didn't have a car and had been taking rideshares to and from work. She said it was getting expensive, especially with the surge pricing that kicks in during late night hours. After Jessica had been there for about 2 weeks, she asked if I could give her a ride home after our shift ended. She lived about 15 minutes out of my way, but I figured it wouldn't be a big deal to help out a co-worker who was clearly struggling financially. I said yes, and she was incredibly grateful. She promised it would just be temporary until she could figure out a better transportation solution. The temporary arrangement quickly became a permanent expectation. Every single night after our shift, Jessica would wait by my car in the parking lot, ready for her ride home. She never asked if it was okay or if I had other plans. She just assumed I'd be giving her a lift. At first I didn't mind because she seemed genuinely appreciative and would always thank me profusely. But after a few months, the situation started wearing on me. The extra 30 minutes of driving every night meant I wasn't getting home until almost 7 a.m, which cut into my already limited sleep time. Jessica lived in a part of town that required me to drive through heavy morning traffic, turning what should have been a quick trip home into a frustrating commute. My gas expenses were also adding up significantly with the extra driving every single day. I started dropping hints that maybe Jessica should look into other transportation options. I'd mention how expensive gas was getting, or talk about how tired I was after our long shifts. But Jessica either didn't pick up on the hints or chose to ignore them. She'd just nod along and then continue waiting by my car every morning. The breaking point came when Jessica started treating our car rides like her personal taxi service. She'd ask me to stop at convenience stores or fast food places on the way to her house, adding even more time to our already extended commute. She began inviting friends to ride along without asking me first, cramming additional people into my car and making the whole situation even more awkward. One particularly frustrating morning, Jessica asked me to drive her to her ex-boyfriend's apartment instead of her usual address because she needed to pick up some belongings. This required driving an additional 20 minutes in the opposite direction from my house. When we got there, she disappeared inside for over an hour while I sat in my car waiting, exhausted and increasingly angry about the situation. That's when I finally decided I needed to set boundaries. The next day, I told Jessica that I couldn't continue giving her rides home every night. I explained that the extra driving was affecting my sleep schedule and my budget, and that I needed her to find alternative transportation. I offered to help her research public transit options and suggested she might want to consider carpooling with other co-workers. Jessica's reaction was immediate and dramatic. She accused me of abandoning her when she needed help most and said that I was being selfish by prioritizing my convenience over her safety. She pointed out that taking ride shares home at 6 a.m. as a young woman could be dangerous, and that I was essentially forcing her into unsafe situations by refusing to drive her. She also brought up all the times I'd complained about being bored at work or having nothing to do after our shifts, claiming that giving her rides was hardly a burden when I wasn't doing anything important anyway. Jessica said she thought we were friends, and that friends help each other out during difficult times. Word spread quickly around the office about our disagreement. Several co-workers approached me to say that I was being unreasonable and that helping Jessica with transportation was the right thing to do. They pointed out that I was the only person on our shift who lived anywhere near Jessica's neighbourhood, and that she didn't have many other options for getting home safely. One co-worker told me that refusing to help Jessica made me look selfish and that it would hurt my reputation at work. Another said that the extra gas money was a small price to pay for being a good person and helping someone in need. A few people suggested that I should just ask Jessica to contribute gas money instead of cutting her off completely. But I stood firm in my decision. I explained to anyone who asked that 8 months of daily rides was more than generous, and that Jessica had plenty of time to figure out alternative arrangements. I pointed out that she'd never offered to help with gas money, despite knowing that I was going out of my way every single day to accommodate her. Jessica has been cold toward me ever since our conversation. She found another co-worker who lives closer to her neighbourhood to give her rides, but she makes a point of mentioning how grateful she is for their kindness whenever I'm within earshot. She's also been telling people that I abandoned her after she'd come to depend on my help, making me look like the villain in this situation. Some nights I second-guess my decision when I see Jessica waiting for her new ride, or when co-workers make comments about the importance of helping each other out. But most of the time, I'm relieved to drive straight home after work and get those extra 30 minutes of sleep back in my schedule. That story wraps up there. 8 months of free daily rides is incredibly generous, and Jessica clearly took advantage of that kindness by turning it into an entitlement. The fact that she started making additional stops and bringing friends along shows she had zero respect for boundaries. Sometimes helping someone turns into enabling them to avoid taking responsibility for their own problems. You can't be someone's permanent solution to a temporary problem. Let's move into our next story about supporting a partner's questionable life choices. Am I the bad person for not supporting my partner's career change? I'm Sarah, I'm 29, and I've been with my boyfriend Alex for 3 years. We live together in a pretty expensive city where rent alone takes up about 40% of my monthly income. Alex and I both work full-time jobs. I'm a nurse at a local hospital, and until recently, he worked as an IT specialist at a mid-sized company. Alex has always been into gaming and streaming as a hobby. He'd spend his evenings and weekends playing various games and streaming to a small audience on Twitch. He had maybe 50 regular viewers and would make about $100 a month from donations and subscriptions. I thought it was a fun way for him to unwind after work and connect with people who shared his interests. About 6 months ago, Alex started talking more seriously about turning streaming into his full-time career. He'd show me videos of successful streamers and talk about how they'd built their audiences from nothing. He became obsessed with analysing his streaming metrics and would stay up until 2 or 3 a.m. trying to grow his follower count. His performance at his regular job started suffering because he was exhausted during the day. 3 months ago, Alex told me he'd made a decision. He wanted to quit his IT job and focus on streaming full-time. He said he believed he could make it work if he dedicated all his time and energy to building his channel. He'd calculated that if he could get his viewer count up to a few thousand regular watchers, he'd be able to make enough money from streaming to cover his portion of our expenses. I was immediately concerned about the financial implications. Alex's IT job paid about $60,000 a year, which covered his half of our rent, utilities, groceries, and other shared expenses. His streaming income was maybe $1,200 annually at that point. I asked him how he planned to pay his bills while building up his audience, and he said he was confident he could grow quickly if streaming was his full-time focus. Alex quit his job 2 weeks later without giving me any advance notice. He just came home one day and announced that he'd handed in his resignation and would be starting his streaming career immediately. I was shocked that he'd made such would directly affect our household budget, a major decision without discussing the timeline with me, especially since its first month wasn't too bad because Alex had some savings and his final paycheck to cover his expenses. But by the second month, he started asking me to cover more of our shared costs. He promised it would be temporary and that his streaming income would increase quickly as he put more effort into content creation. Alex's streaming schedule became completely consuming. He'd stream for 8 to 10 hours a day, trying to maintain a consistent presence that would attract new viewers. He stopped doing household chores, stopped cooking, and basically treated our apartment like his personal streaming studio. He'd order takeout constantly because he didn't want to take time away from streaming to prepare meals. After 3 months of this arrangement, Alex's streaming income had increased to maybe about $300 a month, which covered only around 70% of our household expenses. Meanwhile, I was covering the rest with my nurse's salary. I was working extra shifts at the hospital just to make sure we could pay rent and keep up with our bills. I was exhausted and resentful about essentially subsidizing Alex's dream career while he played video games all day. I finally sat Alex down and told him that this arrangement wasn't sustainable. I explained that I couldn't continue carrying the financial burden while he pursued streaming, especially when his income wasn't showing significant growth. I suggested he might need to get a part-time job to help with expenses while building his streaming career on the side. Alex got defensive and accused me of not believing in his dreams. He said that all successful streamers go through a period where they have to sacrifice before seeing financial returns, and that pressuring him to get a regular job would sabotage his chances of making it in the streaming world. He claimed that I was being unsupportive and that a loving partner would be willing to invest in him and his goals. I tried to explain that it wasn't about not believing in him, but about being realistic about our financial situation. I pointed out that I was already making significant sacrifices by working extra hours to cover his expenses, and that asking me to support both of us indefinitely wasn't fair. I suggested we set some concrete milestones for his streaming income, and a timeline for when he would need to find additional work if those goals weren't met. Alex refused to consider getting any kind of part-time job. He said it would interfere with his streaming schedule, and that successful content creators need to be available for their audience consistently. He accused me of trying to sabotage his career because I was jealous that he was pursuing his passion while I was stuck in a traditional job. Our relationship became increasingly tense as the financial pressure continued. I started feeling like Alex was taking advantage of my stability to fund his hobby without any real accountability for results. He seemed to think that because he was spending long hours at his computer, he was working just as hard as I was at the hospital, even though his efforts weren't generating meaningful income. The final straw came when Alex announced he wanted to spend $2,000 of our savings on new streaming equipment. He said better cameras and microphones would help him attract more viewers and increase his earning potential. I told him absolutely not, that money was supposed to be our emergency fund, and I wasn't comfortable spending it on equipment for a venture that wasn't paying for itself. Alex accused me of being controlling and unsupportive. He said that every successful entrepreneur needs to invest in their business, and that my refusal to support his equipment purchases showed I didn't really want him to succeed. He threatened to move out if I couldn't be more supportive of. He wanted to pursue streaming full-time, his career goals. I told Alex that, if needed to do it without expecting me to fund his lifestyle, I said he could either find a way to make streaming profitable enough to cover his expenses, or he could get a regular job and pursue streaming as a side hobby, but I wasn't going to continue working extra shifts to subsidize his gaming time. Alex moved out the following week, saying I had made it clear that I cared more about money than his happiness. He told our mutual friends that I abandoned him when he was trying to build something meaningful, and that I couldn't handle dating someone with ambition and creativity. Some of our friends sided with him, saying that partners should be willing to help each other pursue their goals, and that I should have been more supportive during his transition period. Others understood my perspective, pointing out that carrying the full financial load while he played games all day was more than reasonable for me to object to. I feel guilty sometimes about not being more supportive, but I also know that I couldn't continue working myself to exhaustion to fund what was essentially an expensive hobby. I wanted Alex to succeed, but I needed him to be realistic about the financial responsibilities that come with adult relationships. That story ends there. Alex basically expected Sarah to bankroll his gaming hobby while he ignored all financial reality. $300 a month after quitting a $60,000 job isn't a career transition. It's a midlife crisis funded by someone else. The fact that he refused to even consider part-time work shows he wasn't serious about building a business, just avoiding responsibility. Sometimes supporting someone's dreams means helping them face reality, not enabling their delusions. Moving on to our next story about family dynamics and the limits of patience. Am I the bad person for refusing to speak to my brother until he apologizes? I'm dealing with a family situation that's been building for years, and I finally reached my breaking point last month. My brother Danny is 2 years older than me, and throughout our entire lives, he's made cruel jokes about my appearance that everyone in our family just accepts as his sense of humor. I've always been on the heavier side, even as a kid. Danny started making comments about my weight when I was maybe 10 years old, calling me names and making jokes about how much I ate or how my clothes fit. My parents would tell him to stop, but they'd also laugh sometimes or say things like, "Boys will be boys," when his comments got particularly harsh. As we got older, Danny's comments became more sophisticated and cutting. He would make jokes about my dating prospects, suggest that I would never find someone who could look past my appearance, or compare me unfavorably to other family members. At family gatherings, he would wait until everyone was around to make these comments, turning my insecurities into entertainment for relatives, who would then laugh uncomfortably or try to change the subject. The worst part was that Danny was genuinely funny when he wasn't targeting me. He could make people laugh without being cruel, but something about my presence seemed to bring out this mean-spirited side of him. I started dreading family events because I knew he would find some way to humiliate me in front of everyone, and I knew our family would just brush it off as sibling teasing. I tried talking to my parents about Danny's behaviour multiple times over the years. They'd acknowledge that his comments were inappropriate, but they'd also say that he didn't mean anything by it and that I was being too sensitive. They'd suggest that I should develop thicker skin or learn to give it back to him instead of asking them to intervene in our relationship. When I was in college, I started working out regularly and changed my eating habits. I lost about 60 pounds and felt better about myself than I had in years. The first time I saw Danny after losing the weight, I thought maybe his comments would stop, or at least become less frequent. Instead, he started making jokes about how I was finally trying to be attractive and speculating about what had motivated me to lose weight. Even when I was at a healthy weight and feeling confident, Danny found ways to undermine me. He'd make comments about my skin, my hair, my clothing choices, or my personality. It became clear that his need to put me down wasn't really about my appearance. It was about maintaining some kind of power dynamic, where he got to be the one who made fun of me while everyone else watched. The final incident happened at our cousin's wedding last month. I'd been seeing someone for about 6 months, the first relationship I'd had in years where I felt truly comfortable and confident. I brought my girlfriend Maria to the wedding, and I was excited to introduce her to my extended family. Maria is wonderful, and I was proud to have her by my side. During the reception, Danny had been drinking and seemed to be in particularly good spirits. When he saw Maria and me dancing, he grabbed the microphone from the DJ and announced that he wanted to give a toast to his little brother, who had finally found someone desperate enough to date him. He went on to joke about how Maria must have low standards and how I'd better lock her down before she realised she could do better. The entire reception went silent. Maria looked mortified, and I could see relatives looking back and forth between us with uncomfortable expressions. I felt humiliated in front of my girlfriend, my family, and complete strangers who were just trying to enjoy a wedding celebration. I walked over to Danny, took the microphone away from him, and told him that his comment was cruel and inappropriate. He laughed and said I needed to learn to take a joke, that everyone knew he was just messing around. I told him that 30 years of jokes at my expense were enough, and that his behaviour was unacceptable, regardless of how much he'd been drinking. Danny got defensive and said that I was being dramatic over harmless sibling teasing. Other family members started trying to smooth things over, saying that Danny hadn't meant anything by it and that we should just move past it and enjoy the celebration. But I'd reached my limit. I told Danny that unless he apologised to both me and Maria for his comment, I was done having a relationship with him. Danny refused to apologise. He said that if I couldn't handle his sense of humour after all these years, that was my problem, not his. He accused me of trying to make the wedding about my hurt feelings instead of celebrating our cousin. Several relatives agreed with him, saying that I was overreacting to what was meant to be a light-hearted joke. Maria and I left the wedding early. On the drive home, she told me that she couldn't believe my family had allowed Danny to speak to me that way for so long. She said that listening to him humiliate me in front of everyone made her understand why I'd been hesitant to introduce her to my family in the first place. Since the wedding, I've refused to attend any family gatherings where Danny will be present. I've told my parents that I won't have a relationship with him until he acknowledges that his behaviour has been hurtful and apologises for decades of cruel comments. My parents think I'm being stubborn and that I should be the bigger person by forgiving him and moving on. They've been pressuring me to reconcile with Danny, saying that family's more important than holding grudges over jokes that weren't meant to hurt anyone. They point out that Danny has always treated me this way, and that suddenly deciding it's unacceptable is unfair to him. They say that missing family events is punishing everyone for Danny's behaviour. Danny hasn't reached out to me at all since the wedding. According to my parents, he thinks I'm being overly dramatic, and that I'll eventually get over it, and things will go back to normal. He's apparently told other family members that I've become too sensitive since I started dating Maria, and that she's probably encouraging me to cut ties with my family. Some relatives support my decision to set boundaries with Danny. My aunt told me that she's been uncomfortable with his comments about me for years, but didn't know how to address it. My younger cousin said she's proud of me for finally standing up to him, but the majority of my family thinks I should just accept that this is how Danny is and that trying to change him at this point is hopeless. I miss seeing my family, but I don't miss the anxiety I used to feel before every gathering, wondering what Danny would say to humiliate me this time. Maria has been incredibly supportive, and our relationship has actually gotten stronger since I've started setting boundaries with toxic family members. I keep waiting for Danny to reach out and apologize, but it's been 2 months now, and I'm starting to think he never will. My parents continue to pressure me to be the one who reaches out first, but I feel like that would just reinforce the idea that his behavior is acceptable as long as I eventually get over it. That story concludes there. 30 years of systematic bullying disguised as jokes isn't sibling humor. It's emotional abuse that the whole family enabled. The wedding incident was just the final public humiliation in a lifetime of cruelty that everyone excused because that's just how Danny is. Sometimes the only way to stop being someone's punching bag is to walk away completely. The fact that Danny won't even acknowledge the hurt he's caused shows exactly why no contact was the right choice. Our next story deals with some seriously problematic family cooking situations. Am I the bad person for refusing to eat my mother-in-law's cooking? I'm Laura, I'm 31, and I've been married to my husband Tom for 5 years. His mother Carol has always been very welcoming to me, and she loves hosting family dinners at her house every Sunday. The problem is that Carol's cooking consistently makes me violently ill, and I've finally reached the point where I can't pretend everything is fine anymore. The first time I ate Carol's cooking was about 6 years ago when Tom and I were still dating. She made what she called her famous chicken casserole, and within 2 hours of eating it, I was throwing up and had severe stomach cramps. I assumed it was just bad timing. Maybe I was getting sick anyway, or maybe the chicken hadn't been cooked to the right temperature. I didn't want to offend her by suggesting there was anything wrong with her food. Over the next few months, I started noticing a pattern. Every single time I ate Carol's cooking, I would get sick within a few hours. It didn't matter what she made. Roast beef, pasta dishes, even simple things like sandwiches. Something about her food preparation consistently made me ill. Tom never seemed to have any problems, and neither did his father or siblings. So I started wondering if I had developed some kind of sensitivity. I tried to figure out what was causing the problem. I watched Carol cook a few times to see if I could identify any obvious food safety issues. What I observed was pretty concerning. She would leave raw meat cooking it. She'd use the same cutting board for raw chicken and vegetables without washing it in between. She'd taste. Her kitchen always seemed cluttered, and not spoons back into the food. Things with spoons and then put those same sitting on counters for hours before particularly clean. The worst incident happened about 2 years ago during Thanksgiving. Carol had prepared this elaborate meal that she'd been planning for weeks. She was so proud of everything she had made, and the whole family was praising her cooking skills. I tried to eat small portions of everything to be polite, but within an hour of dinner, I was in the bathroom, throwing up so violently that Tom had to take me to the emergency room. The doctor said I had severe food poisoning and needed IV fluids because I was so dehydrated. When Tom told his family what happened, Carol was offended and insisted that her food couldn't have been the cause. She said maybe I had eaten something earlier in the day that had made me sick, or that I must have picked up a stomach bug somewhere else. She seemed genuinely hurt that anyone would suggest her cooking was responsible. After that incident, I started bringing my own food to family gatherings. After I'd eat beforehand, and then just pick at small amounts of Carol's cooking to be social. But Carol noticed that I wasn't eating much and started making comments about how I was too thin and needed to eat more. She'd pile food onto my plate and watch to make sure I was actually eating it. Tom was caught in the middle and didn't know how to handle the situation. He could see that I was genuinely getting sick, but he also suggesting there was something wrong with her cooking. He didn't want to hurt his mother's feelings by started making excuses for why we couldn't attend Sunday dinners as often, but that just made Carol more determined to feed me when we did show up. The situation came to a head 3 months ago when Carol announced that she wanted to cook a special birthday dinner for me. She'd been planning it for weeks and had invited the entire extended family. I knew I couldn't eat her food without getting sick, but I also knew that refusing would create a huge family drama on what was supposed to be my special day. I decided to be honest with Tom about the situation. I told him that I couldn't continue pretending to enjoy his mother's cooking when it consistently made me ill. I explained that I had been trying to be polite for years, but I was tired of spending family gatherings feeling sick or worrying about what I was eating. I asked him to help me figure out a way to handle this that wouldn't hurt Carol's feelings. Tom suggested that maybe we could offer to help Carol in the kitchen, thinking that we could subtly improve her food safety practices without directly criticizing her methods. But when we tried this approach, Carol got defensive and said she'd been cooking for 40 years and didn't need help from anyone. She seemed to interpret our offers to assist as criticism of her abilities. Finally, I decided I had to be direct. I sat down with Carol and explained that her cooking consistently made me sick, and that I thought it might be related to food safety practices. I was careful to frame it as my own sensitivity rather than criticizing her skills directly. I suggested that maybe we could cook together sometimes, so I could learn her recipes and adapt them to work with my apparently sensitive stomach. Carol's reaction was immediate and intense. She accused me of insulting her cooking and said that she had been feeding her family for decades without anyone else getting sick. She insisted I was being dramatic and probably making myself sick with anxiety rather than actually having problems with her food. She even suggested that I was using food as an excuse to avoid family gatherings because I didn't really want to spend time with them. The birthday dinner became incredibly awkward. Carol had spent days preparing this elaborate meal, and I knew I couldn't eat any of it without getting sick. I tried to explain to the gathered family members that I had some dietary restrictions, but Carol kept pushing food on me and making comments about how I was being ungrateful and disrespectful. When I continued to decline most of the food, Carol started crying and said that I was ruining her special dinner for me. She accused me of being spoiled and said that when she was growing up, people ate what was put in front of them and were grateful for it. The whole family was uncomfortable, and several relatives suggested that I should just feel better. Since then, I've stopped attending Sunday dinners entirely. Carol has been telling people that I think I'm too good for her cooking and that I've become snobbish since marrying into their family. Tom is frustrated because he feels like he has to choose between supporting me and keeping peace with his mother. Some family members think I should just take antacids before eating Carol's food and deal with being a little uncomfortable for the sake of family harmony. But I'm tired of spending every family gathering either sick or anxious about getting sick. I've suggested alternatives like meeting at restaurants or having potluck-style gatherings where everyone contributes dishes. But Carol says that defeats the purpose of her hosting and that cooking for family is how she shows love. That story ends there. This is such a frustrating situation because food poisoning isn't something you can just tough out for the sake of politeness. If someone's cooking consistently makes you sick, that's a legitimate health concern, not a personal attack on their abilities. Carol's defensive reaction, instead of concern for Laura's well-being, shows she's more worried about her ego than her daughter-in-law's health. Sometimes, protecting your physical health has to come before protecting someone's feelings, even when it creates family tension. Let's move to our next story about friendship and financial expectations. Am I the bad person for not gifting my friend a concert ticket back? I'm Darren, I'm 25, and I've been dealing with drama from my friend group over something that happened last month. I'd bought 2 tickets to see my favourite band when they came to town. Tickets that cost me about $150 each and sold out within minutes of going on sale. I originally bought the tickets to go with my girlfriend Maya, who I'd been dating for about 8 months. We were both huge fans of this band, and I was really excited to experience the concert with her. I bought the tickets 3 months in advance because I knew they would be impossible to get once they went on general sale. About 6 weeks before the concert, Maya and I broke up. It wasn't a messy breakup, but it was definitely final. She said she needed space to figure out what she wanted in life, and we agreed it was best to end things. Obviously, this left me with an extra concert ticket that I needed to figure out what to do with. My first thought was to ask one of my friends if they wanted to buy the ticket from me. I wasn't trying to make a profit, I just wanted to get back what I had paid so I wouldn't be out $300 total. My friend Jake immediately said he was interested and asked how much I wanted for it. I told him $150, which was exactly what I had paid. Jake seemed surprised by the price and said he had been hoping I would just give him the ticket since we were friends. He pointed out that the ticket was already paid for and that I would be going to the concert anyway, so it wouldn't cost me anything extra to bring him along. He said that's what friends do for each other, share experiences and opportunities. I explained that I had spent $300 of my own money on those tickets and that I couldn't afford to just give away $150. Jake said he understood that I had paid for the tickets, but argued that since my original plan had fallen through, I should be willing to take a loss to include a friend in something we would both enjoy. He even suggested that my friendship with him should be worth more than $150. This put me in an awkward position. I really did want to go to the concert with a friend rather than alone, and Jake and I had been close since college, but $150 was a significant amount of money for me. I'd had to skip other social activities for a couple of weeks to afford these tickets in the first place. I couldn't just absorb that cost without it affecting my budget for the rest of the month. I told Jake I'd think about it, and maybe we could work out some kind of compromise. I suggested that maybe he could pay $100 for the ticket, which would mean we'd both be taking a $50 loss on the original plan. Jake said that was still too much money and that he'd rather just skip the concert if I was going to charge him anything. After thinking about it for a few days, I decided to sell the ticket online. I posted it on a ticket resale platform and was able to get $180 for it because the show was sold out and demand was high. I actually made a small profit, which helped offset some of the other expenses I'd had that month. When Jake found out that I'd sold the ticket to a stranger instead of giving it to him, he was furious. He said I'd chosen money over friendship, and that he couldn't believe I'd rather make a few extra dollars than share the experience with someone who actually cared about me. He accused me of being greedy and said that real friends don't nickel and dime each other. Jake told other people in our friend group about the situation, and now several of them are taking his side. They're saying that I should have just given him the ticket since I was going to the concert anyway, and that selling it to a stranger was a betrayal of our friendship. One friend said that if someone in our group had an extra ticket to something, we'd all expect them to share it, rather than trying to make money off of it. A few friends have pointed out that Jake could have afforded the $150 if he'd really wanted to go. He'd spent more than that on drinks and dinner the weekend after I offered him the ticket. They think he was just trying to get something for free, and that I was right to sell it to someone who was willing to pay full price. The whole situation has created tension in our friend group. Jake has been distant toward me and makes passive-aggressive comments about people who prioritize money over relationships. Some mutual friends have told me that I should apologize and offer to pay for Jake to go to another concert to make up for the situation. I went to the concert by myself and actually had a great time. I met some other fans there and ended up hanging out with them for most of the show. But I keep second-guessing my decision because I lost a friendship over what amounts to $150 talent. Part of me wonders if I should have just given Jake the ticket to preserve our relationship. On the other hand, I feel like Jake was trying to take advantage of my breakup situation to get a free ticket to a sold-out show. If he'd really wanted to go, he could have tried to buy his own ticket when they first went on sale, or he could have paid me what I'd asked for. Instead, he expected me to absorb the financial loss just because we were friends. The whole thing has made me more careful about mixing money and friendship. I've realized that some people have very different expectations about what friends should do for each other financially, and that can lead to conflicts when those expectations don't align. That story wraps up right there. Jake basically wanted a free $150 concert ticket and got mad when his friend didn't subsidize his entertainment. The whole friends don't charge friends argument falls apart when you realize Jake could have bought his own ticket originally, but chose not to. Friendship doesn't entitle you to other people's money, especially when they're already dealing with the financial fallout of a breakup. Darren made the right call, selling to someone who actually valued the ticket enough to pay for it. Our next story takes us into the world of academic integrity and friendship expectations. Am I the bad person for not letting my friend copy my coding project? I'm Ethan, I'm 22, and I'm a computer science major in my final semester of college. I've been working incredibly hard to maintain my GPA because I'm hoping to get into a competitive graduate program next year. One of my most challenging classes this semester has been advanced software development, where we have to complete several major coding projects that count for a huge portion of our final grade. The latest assignment was to create a complex web application from scratch over the course of 6 weeks. We had to design the user interface, implement a database system, handle user authentication, and create multiple interactive features. The professor made it very clear that this was an individual assignment and that any collaboration or code sharing would be considered academic dishonesty. I started working on the project immediately when it was assigned. I spent 4 to 5 hours every day for 6 weeks writing code, debugging problems, researching solutions online, and testing different features. There were nights when I stayed up until 3 a.m. trying to fix a bug that was preventing my application from working properly. This project consumed most of my free time, but I was proud of what I was creating. My friend Marcus is also in this class, but he took a very different approach to the assignment. For the first 4 weeks, he barely worked on it at all. He kept saying he had plenty of time and that coding projects always seemed more complicated than they actually were. He'd make jokes about how I was stressing out over something that he could probably finish in a weekend. With 2 weeks left before the deadline, Marcus started to panic. He realised that the project was much more complex than he'd anticipated, and he was nowhere near having a working application. He'd written maybe 20% of the code he needed, and most of what he had wasn't functioning properly. He started staying up late trying to catch up, but it was clear that he wasn't going to be able to finish on time. 3 days before the deadline, Marcus came to me asking for help. At first, he just wanted me to explain some of the concepts he was struggling with, which I was happy to do. I spent several hours walking him through different programming techniques and helping him debug some of his code. I thought I was being a good friend by sharing my knowledge without actually doing the work for him. But as the deadline got closer, Marcus became more desperate. He started asking how I had implemented certain features. Then he asked if he could look at my code, saying he wasn't going to copy anything directly, but that seeing my approach would help him figure out his own solutions. I was uncomfortable with this request because it felt like it was crossing the line into academic dishonesty. The night before the assignment was due, Marcus called me in a complete panic. He said his application was still broken and that he was going to fail the class if he couldn't submit something that worked. He begged me to send him my project files so he could see how I'd structured everything. He promised he would just use it as a reference and would rewrite everything in his own words. I told Marcus that I couldn't share my code with him because it would violate the academic integrity policy. I explained that even if he rewrote parts of it, using my project as a template would still be considered collaboration on an individual assignment. I offered to stay up with him and help him debug his own code, but I said I couldn't let him copy or closely reference my work. Marcus got angry and accused me of being selfish and competitive. He said that I was prioritizing my grade over our friendship and that real friends help each other succeed. He pointed out that I'd already done the work anyway, so sharing it wouldn't hurt me at all. He said I was being paranoid about the academic integrity rules and that professors never actually check for this kind of thing. I stood firm in my refusal to share my code. Marcus ended up submitting his broken application and received a failing grade on the assignment. This grade significantly hurt his overall performance in the class, and he's probably going to have to retake it next semester to graduate on time. Since then, Marcus has been telling people that I sabotaged his academic success because I was too competitive to help a friend. He said that I could have easily helped him pass the class without any consequences to myself, but that I chose to let him fail instead. Several mutual friends have asked me why I didn't just share my code, especially since Marcus was desperate and the consequences for him were so severe. Some people in our friend group think I made the right decision by maintaining academic integrity standards. They point out that Marcus had 6 weeks to work on the project, and that his poor time management shouldn't become my problem. They say that sharing my code would have been unfair to other students who did their own work, and that it could have gotten both of us in serious trouble with the university. Others think I should have been more supportive of a friend in crisis. They argue that college is stressful enough without friends refusing to help each other succeed. They say that the academic integrity rules are overly strict, and that sharing code between friends is different from cheating on an exam or plagiarizing a paper. Marcus has been cold toward me ever since the assignment was due. He stopped inviting me to group hangouts and has been making passive-aggressive comments about people who are too selfish to help their friends. The situation has created tension in our entire friend group because people feel like they have to choose sides. I feel bad that Marcus is struggling academically, but I also feel like I made the right decision. I worked incredibly hard on that project, and sharing it would have undermined the integrity of my own work. I also worry that if I'd helped Marcus cheat on this assignment, he would have expected me to help him with future assignments too, creating a pattern of academic dishonesty. The whole situation has made me think about the boundaries between friendship and academic competition. I want to support my friends, but I also think there are limits to what that support should include when it comes to schoolwork that's supposed to be completed individually. That story concludes there. 6 weeks of advance notice, and Marcus chose to procrastinate until the last minute, then expected his friend to bail him out by risking both their academic careers. Academic integrity exists for a reason. It ensures that grades, efforts, and knowledge actually reflect individual Ethan offering. To help debug and explain concepts was already generous friendship. Nobody owes you their hard work just because you failed to manage your own time properly. Moving on to our next story about family expectations and personal boundaries. Am I the bad person for skipping my dad's retirement party? I'm Hannah, I'm 27, and last month I made a decision that has torn my family apart. My father was retiring after 35 years at the same company, and my mother had been planning this huge retirement celebration for months. She'd invited about 60 people, including extended family, his co-workers, and family friends. The party was supposed to be this big milestone celebration of his career achievements. The problem is that my father has never shown up for any of my important milestones, and I finally decided that I wasn't going to show up for his either. I know that sounds petty, but there's a long history behind this decision that goes back to when I was a child. Growing up, my father was completely absent from anything that mattered to me. He missed every single one of my school plays, even when I had leading roles that I'd been practicing for months. He never came to my soccer games, not even the championship game when I scored the winning goal. When I graduated from high school as valedictorian, he was too busy with work to attend the ceremony. My mother sat alone in the audience, while other families celebrated together. The pattern continued into my adult life. When I graduated from college, my father said he couldn't take time off work to attend the ceremony. When I got my first job at a prestigious law firm, he barely acknowledged it. When I got promoted to partner last year, something I'd been working toward for 5 years, he responded to my text with, "That's nice, honey," and never brought it up again. The most hurtful incident was when I got engaged to my fiancée 2 years ago. We'd planned this nice family dinner to announce our engagement and show everyone the ring. My father showed up an hour late because he'd decided to stop by the office first to finish some paperwork. When we told him the news, he shook my fiancée's hand and then immediately started talking about a work project that was stressing him out. Throughout my entire life, my father has prioritized his job over every single family event or personal milestone. His excuse was always that he was working hard to provide for our family. But even after I became financially independent and successful in my own career, he continued to treat my achievements as less important than whatever was happening at his office. When my mother started planning the retirement party, she automatically assumed I'd be there. She put me in charge of creating a photo slideshow of my father's life and asked me to give a speech about what a great father he'd been. I felt sick thinking about standing up in front of 60 people and pretending that my father had been present and supportive throughout my life. I tried talking to my mother about my feelings, but she got defensive immediately. She said that my father had worked long hours to give me opportunities and that I should be grateful for the sacrifices he'd made. She pointed out that I'd had a privileged childhood with private school and family vacations, and that none of that would have been possible without his dedication to his career. I explained to my mother that while I appreciated the financial stability my father had provided, I'd needed emotional support and presence too. I told her about all the times I'd looked for him in the audience at school events and felt disappointed when he wasn't there. I said that his retirement party felt like another example of our family celebrating him while my own achievements went unrecognized. My mother said I was being dramatic and holding grudges over things that happened years ago. She argued that my father loves me and that he'd shown his love by working hard to provide for our family. She said that missing his retirement party would be cruel and that I'd regret not being there to celebrate this important transition in his life. 2 weeks before the party, I made my decision. I called my mother and told her that I wouldn't be attending. I explained that I didn't feel comfortable celebrating someone who had never made an effort to celebrate me. I said that if 30 years of my milestones weren't important enough for him to attend, then his retirement wasn't important enough for me to attend either. My mother was devastated. She said I was being vindictive and that I was punishing my father for working hard to support our family. She begged me to reconsider and said that my absence would ruin the entire celebration. She worried about what she would tell the extended family and friends who would ask where I was. I offered a compromise. I said I would attend the party if my father would acknowledge that he'd missed important events in my life and apologise for prioritising work over family moments. I wasn't asking for a dramatic scene, just some recognition that his absence had affected me and a commitment to being more present going forward. My mother brought this proposal to my father, and his response was exactly what I'd expected. He said he'd done his best as a parent and provider, and that he shouldn't have to apologise for working hard to give me a good life. He said that if I couldn't appreciate the sacrifices he'd made, that was my problem, not his. He refused to acknowledge that missing my events had been hurtful or wrong. So I stuck to my decision and didn't attend the retirement party. According to my mother, it was a beautiful celebration, with great food and heartfelt speeches from his co-workers. But she said that people kept asking where I was, and she had to make excuses about why his only daughter wasn't there to celebrate with him. My extended family has been divided on my decision. Some relatives think I was justified in setting boundaries and that my father needed to face consequences for years of neglect. Others think I should have been the bigger person and attended the party regardless of past hurt. They argue that family members should support each other during major life transitions, even when relationships have been imperfect. My father hasn't spoken to me since the party. According to my mother, he's hurt that I would publicly embarrass him by not showing up to his retirement celebration. He apparently told people that he doesn't understand why I'm so angry with him, and that he always did his best as a father. I don't regret my decision, but I am sad about the ongoing rift it's created in my family. I'd hoped that my absence might prompt some reflection on my father's part about his priorities and his relationship with me. Instead, it seems to have convinced him that I'm ungrateful and vindictive. Some friends have suggested that I should reach out to my father and try to repair our relationship, regardless of who was right or wrong about the party situation. They point out that he's getting older and that I might regret not having a relationship with him later in life. But I feel like reaching out now would just reinforce the idea that I should always be the one to accommodate his behaviour without expecting any accountability from him. That story ends there. This is the natural consequence of 30 years of choosing work over family relationships. You can't expect someone to celebrate your milestones when you've consistently ignored all of theirs. Hannah's father had countless opportunities to show up for her important moments and chose not to. The fact that he still won't acknowledge how his absence affected her shows he hasn't learned anything from this situation. Sometimes, the only way to get someone's attention is to be absent when they expect you to be there. Let's move to our final story about property boundaries and neighbour expectations. Am I the bad person for refusing to be my cousin's emergency contact? I'm 29, and my cousin Tyler is 31. We've been close since childhood, but over the past 5 years, Tyler has developed what I can only describe as a reckless lifestyle that consistently puts him in dangerous situations. Tyler works as a freelance photographer, which sounds harmless enough, but he specialises in extreme sports and adventure photography. He's constantly travelling to remote locations to photograph rock climbers, base jumpers, and people doing other high-risk activities. The problem is that Tyler has started participating in these activities himself, despite having no formal training or safety equipment. In the last 2 years alone, I've received calls from hospitals in 4 different states because Tyler was listed as my emergency contact. The first time was when he tried to photograph a rock climbing expedition and decided to climb alongside the group without proper gear or experience. He fell about 15 feet and broke his wrist and several ribs. I had to drive 6 hours to a hospital in Colorado to pick him up because he had no other way to get home. The second incident happened when Tyler was photographing a motorcycle stunt group and decided he wanted to try jumping his own bike over a ravine. He'd never done any kind of motorcycle stunt before, but he convinced the group to let him attempt a smaller jump. He crashed spectacularly and ended up with a concussion and a dislocated shoulder. Again, I got the call at 2 a.m. from a hospital emergency room. The most recent incident was 3 months ago when Tyler was documenting a group of people who were illegally base jumping off a bridge. Instead of just taking photos, he decided to jump himself using borrowed equipment that he had no idea how to operate properly. His parachute opened late, and he landed hard, fracturing his ankle and requiring surgery. The hospital called me while I was at work, and I had to leave an important meeting to deal with his emergency contact responsibilities. Each time this happens, Tyler is apologetic and promises he'll be more careful in the future. He always says he got caught up in the moment and that documenting these activities made him want to try them himself. But he never actually changes his behaviour or takes proper safety precautions before attempting dangerous activities. The financial impact on me has been significant. I've had to take unpaid time off work multiple times to deal with Tyler's emergencies. I've driven hundreds of miles to pick him up from hospitals, and I've had to help him with expenses when his insurance didn't cover everything. Last time I had to loan him money for physical therapy because he couldn't work with his injured ankle. But beyond the money and time, the emotional stress is killing me. Every time my phone rings late at night, I panic about Tyler. I've started thinking it might be another hospital calling anxiety about whether he's safe, especially when he posts photos from remote locations on social media. I feel like I'm constantly waiting for the next emergency call. 2 weeks ago, Tyler called me excited about a new project. He's been hired to photograph a group that does extreme winter mountaineering, and he's planning to join them on a climb in Alaska next month. When he mentioned this, I realised that nothing was going to change. He's addicted to the adrenaline and doesn't seem to care about the consequences for himself or the people who care about him. I told Tyler that I couldn't be his emergency contact anymore. I explained that the constant worry and responsibility was affecting my mental health and my ability to focus on my own life. I said that he needed to find someone else to list as his emergency contact, or better yet, he needed to start making safer choices about the activities he participates in. Tyler was shocked and hurt by my decision. He said that I was abandoning him when he needed me most and that emergency contacts are supposed to be there for family members, no matter what. He pointed out that he'd never asked me to come to the hospital, that I'd chosen to do that because I cared about him. He said that if something serious happened and I wasn't listed as his contact, I might not find out about it until it was too late. My aunt and uncle, Tyler's parents, are furious with me. They say that Tyler has always been adventurous and that I should support his passion instead of trying to control his lifestyle. They pointed out that he makes good money from his photography work and that taking risks is part of his job. They think I'm being overdramatic about the dangers and that I should be proud to have such an accomplished photographer in the family. Several other family members have weighed in, with most of them taking Tyler's side. They say that being someone's emergency contact is a responsibility you don't just walk away from, especially when that person is family. Some have suggested that I should talk to Tyler about being more careful instead of removing myself from his support system entirely. But I feel like I've tried talking to him multiple times and it hasn't made any difference. He continues to put himself in dangerous situations without proper training or safety equipment, and I can't handle being the person who gets called every time something goes wrong. I want Tyler to be safe, but I can't force him to make better decisions, and I can't continue sacrificing my own well-being to clean up after his reckless choices. Tyler has found another emergency contact, one of his photographer friends, who apparently thinks his lifestyle is exciting rather than concerning. But he's still angry with me and says that I've shown him that family loyalty has limits. He's been posting passive-aggressive things on social media about people who abandon you when life gets challenging. That story comes to an end right there. Tyler basically turned his cousin into his personal crisis management service while refusing to acknowledge that his reckless behaviour was the problem. Being someone's emergency contact doesn't mean enabling their dangerous choices or sacrificing your mental health for their adrenaline addiction. After multiple hospital visits across 4 states, setting boundaries wasn't abandonment, it was self-preservation. Sometimes caring about someone means refusing to enable their self-destructive behaviour. Moving on to our next story, about lending policies between friends. Am I the bad person for not letting my neighbour's kids swim in my pool? I'm 35 and I live in a suburban neighbourhood where most houses have decent-sized backyards. Last year, I finally saved up enough money to install the swimming pool I'd been dreaming about for years. It cost me about $25,000, which was a huge investment, but I'd been planning and saving for it since I bought the house 5 years ago. The pool installation was a major project that took most of last summer to complete. I had to get permits, deal with contractors, and coordinate all the electrical and plumbing work. My backyard was torn up for months, and I couldn't use my outdoor space at all during the construction. When it was finally finished in late August, I was thrilled to finally have my own private swimming space. My next-door neighbours, the Johnsons, have 3 kids aged 8, 10 and 12. They seem like good kids, and I've always been friendly with the family. When they saw the pool going in, the kids were obviously excited and would come to the fence to watch the construction progress. I thought it was cute that they were so interested in the project. The first issue came up right after the pool was completed. Mrs. Johnson came over to congratulate me on the new addition and mentioned how much her kids were looking forward to swimming season next year. She said something about how nice it would be for the neighbourhood kids to have a place to cool off during the hot summer months. I made some polite comments about looking forward to enjoying it, but I didn't make any specific commitments about letting other people use it. This past spring, as the weather started getting warmer, Mrs. Johnson approached me directly about her kids using the pool. She explained that they'd been talking about it all winter and were really excited about the possibility of swimming in our backyard. She said that her kids were good swimmers and that she'd always supervise them when they were over. I felt put on the spot and didn't want to seem like a bad neighbour, so I said that maybe we could work something out occasionally. I was thinking about maybe having them over for a barbecue sometime where they could swim while the adults socialised. But Mrs. Johnson seemed to interpret this as a general invitation for her kids to use the pool regularly. Within a week of that conversation, I started finding the Johnson kids in my backyard without permission. I'd come home from work to discover them swimming in my pool while Mrs. Johnson was nowhere to be seen. When I asked them about it, They said their mum had told them it was okay to swim whenever they wanted, as long as they were careful. I immediately went to talk to Mrs. Johnson about the situation. I explained that I hadn't given permission for unsupervised swimming and that I was uncomfortable with her kids being in my backyard when I wasn't home. She seemed surprised and said she thought I'd given them general permission to use the pool. She apologised for the misunderstanding, but also mentioned how disappointed her kids would be if they couldn't swim anymore. I tried to establish some boundaries. I said that the kids could swim occasionally when I was home and when Mrs. Johnson was present to supervise them. I explained that I needed to know in advance when they wanted to use the pool so I could make sure it was convenient for me. Mrs. Johnson agreed to these terms, but she also made comments about how lucky I was to have such a big pool all to myself and how nice it was when neighbours shared their good fortune. The boundary setting didn't work as well as I'd hoped. Mrs. Johnson would send her kids over to ask if they could swim at times that weren't convenient for me. They'd show up right as I was getting home from work when I wanted to relax, or on weekends when I had plans to use the pool myself. When I'd say it wasn't a good time, the kids would look disappointed and Mrs. Johnson would make comments about how they'd been looking forward to swimming all day. I also started noticing that my pool maintenance costs were increasing. With extra people using the pool regularly, I had to add chemicals more frequently and run the filtration system longer. My water bill went up noticeably during the summer months. I was also concerned about liability issues. If one of the kids got hurt in my pool, I could potentially be held responsible, even if I wasn't home when it happened. The situation came to a head in July when I came home to find not just the Johnson kids in my pool, but several of their friends as well. There were about 8 kids swimming and playing in my backyard without any adult supervision. They'd apparently invited other neighbourhood kids over for an impromptu pool party. My pool area was a mess, with wet towels everywhere and pool toys scattered around. I was furious and told all the kids they needed to get out immediately. When Mrs. Johnson came over to see what the commotion was about, I explained that this was exactly the kind of situation I'd been worried about. I said that having a pool party with 8 unsupervised kids was completely unacceptable and potentially dangerous. Mrs. Johnson got defensive and said that kids need places to have fun during the summer and that pools are meant to be enjoyed. She said that I was being selfish by keeping such a large pool to myself when there were so many children in the neighbourhood who would appreciate the opportunity to swim. She pointed out that I didn't have kids of my own, so the pool was just sitting empty most of the time anyway. That conversation made me realise that Mrs. Johnson and I had completely different expectations about pool sharing. She seemed to think that because I had a pool, I had some obligation to share it with the neighbourhood kids. I felt like my expensive investment in my own property was being treated like a public amenity. I made the decision to tell Mrs. Johnson that her kids could no longer use the pool. I explained that the situation had gotten out of hand and that I needed to protect my investment and limit my liability. I said that I'd tried to be accommodating, but that the boundaries I'd set weren't being respected. Mrs. Johnson was angry and accused me of being selfish and anti-children. She said that heard that I was being unreasonable by suddenly changing the neighbourhoods with children should expect to share them, and who installed pools in kids had been counting on swimming all. No good reason. She suggested that people summer and that I was disappointing them for rules. Since then, the relationship with the Johnson family has been strained. The kids look sad when they see me in my backyard, and Mrs. Johnson has been cold toward me when we encounter each other. I've heard through other neighbours that she's been telling people I'm selfish and that I don't care about the community. Some neighbours support my decision and say that my pool is my private property and I have every right to control who uses it. Others think I'm being unfriendly and that good neighbours should be more generous with things like pools that can bring joy to children. I do feel guilty sometimes when I'm swimming alone, and I know the kids next door are stuck inside on hot days. But I also feel like I shouldn't be expected to provide free entertainment or assume liability risks just because I invested in improving my own property. That story ends there. Mrs. Johnson basically decided that installing a pool came with community obligations that nobody agreed to, turning a polite gesture into an expectation, then escalating to unsupervised pool parties with 8 kids, shows exactly why boundaries exist. A $25,000 investment doesn't become public property just because kids want to use it. The liability alone could bankrupt someone if something went wrong. And those are all the stories I have for you tonight. If you enjoyed this batch of stories, consider subscribing so you can catch the next one. I upload regularly, and it really helps the channel grow when you leave a like or share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for spending some time here tonight, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care.